This is an audiobook created by Relay Publishing, who own exclusive copyright to the story in all territories and formats. For more information, please go to our website, www.relaypub.com. We hope you enjoy. The Billionaires' Christmas Fiancée. Christmas with the Denton Billionaires, Book 1. By Leslie North. Chapter 1. Joshua Denton clicked his mouse, his finger tapping the left button like a nervous tick while tabbing through Google searches as a new idea occurs to him. He clicked a link, and music exploded out of his speakers. Jumping at the noise, he simultaneously reached to turn down his speakers and close the offending website, knocking his full coffee cup onto his keyboard. Sheath. Pushing everything aside, he grabbed his keyboard, turning it over and desperately shaking cold coffee from it. The music shifted suddenly to the sound of a woman moaning as though she's having either the best orgasm of her life or the best bowel movement. He wasn't entirely sure which, but it needed to stop, now. He reached for his mouse, but his hand came away wet. He heard movement outside his office and his head snapped up. His longtime assistant, Amelia, sat right outside his office door. His open office door. Why did I think it was a good idea to have an open door policy? He grumbled to himself, sending up a silent prayer to anyone who might be listening that she was wearing her headphones. The music started again and he frantically hit Ctrl-Alt-Delete on his keyboard, but nothing happened. Out of desperation, he reached for the toggle switch on the power strip and turned everything off. Sudden blissful silence as the music stopped, but then a loud beeping started. What the? No. He jumped up, his chair flying back and slamming into the credenza behind him, and he was contemplating throwing everything out the nearest window when someone called his name. Mr. Denton? His assistant stood in the open door, her headphones draped around her neck. She was rocking some sort of sexy librarian look that gave him all sorts of thoughts. Dropping back down into his chair, Josh gave up any pretense that everything was under control and gestured at the mess he'd made. A little help? With a curious look on her face, she joined him at his desk. Okay, well first, she stretched out her leg, her skirt riding up her thigh, and tapped the switch on the power strip with the toe of her boot. The incessant beeping continued and before he could say anything, she squatted in front of his desk and then crawled under. There we go, she sang out. What? What are you doing? His mouth had gone dry as her delectable ass was suddenly right in front of him. Her voice wafted up from under his desk. Looks like you plugged your backup power supply into your power strip instead of the outlet in the floor. Won't help save what you're working on if you don't have everything plugged in properly. Now to hit reset. The beeping blissfully stopped and he breathed out a sigh. Thank you. Not finished yet, Mr. Denton, she told him as she scooted back out only to end up kneeling in front of him. Her cheeks were tinged with pink, which he assumed was from her exertions, but seeing her like this gave him all sorts of ideas he shouldn't be having about his assistant. Rising up, she adjusted her skirt and then turned to look at the mess on his desk. All right, let's see what the damage is. Grabbing his keyboard, she gave it a couple taps, and when nothing happened, she frowned. Flipping it over, she did something he couldn't see before setting it back down. Tapping again, suddenly the keyboard lit back up and the speakers kicked back on and the website he was on when this all started was still running. At least it was only music. For now. I've got it from here. That's okay. I got it, she told him as she began clicking. She was standing directly in front of his computer and he had to slide to the right to see what she was doing. Glancing at his monitor, Josh could see at least a dozen tabs open on his computer and he worried that she'd see where his search had taken him. Reaching out, he tapped her arm. Amelia, thank you for your help, but I'm sure you're busy. I can take it from here. The music had gotten louder and he was practically shouting in his need to get her away from his computer. Nonsense, it'll just take me a sec. Seriously, Mr. Denton, how on earth did you end up in this circle of spam? As she clicked to close out the tabs, more would open. With a huff, she tapped Ctrl-Alt-Delete and pulled up the task manager to force his browser to close. There, that should do it. Now to make sure it worked and, oh. Oh. Oh my. She froze and Josh had the sudden desire to bite her on the ass, which was still directly in front of his face, or head out to his car and drive far away. He doubted either of those ideas would be any worse than what he anticipated he would see when she finally moved. Except she had yet to move. Damn it. Could this get any worse? Josh had a doozy of a headache coming on. Blowing out a breath, he was surprised at how calm he sounded when he asked, "Amelia, would you please step away from my computer?" She sidestepped to his left and he could see what she was looking at. "Amelia, I can explain." Chapter 2. Amelia. Wives for hire. Amelia stared at the website open on her boss's computer, and she fought the urge to laugh. When she first heard the noises coming from his office, she decided to ignore it, but just in case, she had turned down the music she was listening to while she worked. When she heard sounds of distress, she decided to investigate, never once expecting to find this. "As I said, I can explain." Her normally put-together boss that she so did not have fantasies about was looking entirely too flustered with his hair sticking up in places where he'd rubbed his head. She kept staring at the escort site, which offered a range of what they referred to as experiences for the discerning man, including temporary girlfriends, wives, and mommies. Amelia was still squeezing the mouse, frozen in indecision, and she jumped when he gently took the mouse from her and closed the website. Whirling around, she was surprised at how close he was to her and she quickly sidled away from his desk and around the other side. "It's okay, Mr. Denton. You don't need to explain anything to me. It's completely normal to have urges." Amelia. She rubbed her hands, twisting her fingers. "I mean, I don't get why you'd use a website when you look like you do, but hey, that's not my business, Anne." Amelia. Backing away, she bumped into the chair she normally sat in when they would work together and tried to step around it, but the slit on her skirt caught on the armrest and she found herself stuck. Reaching behind her, she tried to tug the skirt free, but it wasn't working and she had no idea why. She gave her hips a little shake hoping he wouldn't notice, but when she peeked up at him, she found him staring at her, which only made her talk faster. "Really? It's okay." Senior year in college, the dean of the English department would bring his wife to all the school functions. Eventually, everyone found out that she wasn't his wife. In fact, his real wife showed up to one of the events and I think someone ended up in the pool fully clothed and there was a lot of yelling, but that won't happen to you because you're not married. She really needed to stop talking, but she also needed to get out of his office. "Amelia. Stop talking and sit down. Now." She froze. Her glasses slid down to the tip of her nose and she pushed them back with a huff. She crossed her arms, tilting her hip up, but decided that looked too defensive, so she dropped her arms, and then immediately wanted to cross them again. Giving her hips another little wiggle, she felt her skirt finally come away from the armrest with a little tear and she collapsed down into the chair with relief. Once she was seated, her boss swung around in his chair and reached into the little fridge behind his desk, and pulled out 2 beers. Popping the caps on both, he set one on the desk in front of her. While they'd sometimes celebrated the end of a busy week with drinks, it wasn't even lunchtime. On a Tuesday. Taking a long swig, he tilted his bottle toward her. "Have a drink. I think we both need it." Nodding her head, she reached for the beer and took several swallows, not really tasting it but desperately needing to do something with her hands. They sat in silence, deep in their own thoughts when everything that had happened came flooding back to her and she snorted out a laugh. Slapping her hand over her mouth, she snapped her eyes to his and prepared to apologize, but she found him smiling. He broke the silence first when he asked, "So you think I'm good looking?" Instead of answering, she took another drink and almost choked. She managed to swallow without spewing the beer onto her lap and she caught his smirk. Narrowing her eyes, she sat back in the chair, tapping the beer bottle against her lip as she pretended to be deep in thought. She spoke only when it became clear that he wouldn't break first. "I mean, sure. You're easy on the eyes." He choked at that comment and she hid her grin behind the beer. "Easy on the eyes? Do people even say that anymore?" Amelia shrugged, no longer hiding her smile. "In all seriousness, Mr. Denton, Did you accidentally end up on that site or was it intentional? Joshua Denton, hotel magnate and one of New York's most eligible and richest bachelors, was blushing. There's definitely a first for everything, and while she might regret having this conversation with him later, right now, she was all in. Yes and no, but before I get into it, Ms. MacTaggart, how long have you worked for me? Was this a trick question? Was he going to fire her? I've worked for Denton Hotels for 4 years and I've been your assistant for 2 of them. Taking another sip of his beer, he carefully set the bottle down, then rocked forward in his chair, setting his hands on the desk as he watched her. Do not squirm, Amelia. Then do you think, given all that time and what you witnessed not long ago, you could start calling me Josh or Joshua? Unless of course my being easy on the eyes makes me too intimidating. Amelia felt the heat from her blush shoot across her cheeks and she couldn't stop the laughter. She snorted and then gasped, hoping he hadn't heard, but he had. He chuckled and the weird butterflies that had been fluttering inside her increased their activity and she had to take several breaths before they calmed down. Nodding, she gave the best answer she could. I'll try. He gave her another smile, and she wanted to file them all away in her mind to recall later. She picked at the label on the bottle before setting the beer down on his desk. Easy on the eyes? What had possessed her to say that? Her billionaire boss was gorgeous on a bad day, and now he wanted her to call him Josh? It was hard enough pretending she wasn't attracted to him when she used his last name. She needed to get back to her desk and pretend none of this ever happened. Mr. Joshua, Josh? Stop blowing it, Amelia. If there's nothing else, I should get back to work. Actually there is. Cedar Grove Hotel and Spa, he said, leaning across his desk to grab his mouse and click at something on his computer. What about it? She scooted the chair over to the side of his desk so she could see what he was doing. Thankfully it wasn't another escort site. She recognized the private realty listing site that he regularly used. He was the senior VP of business development, so it was his job to source potential commercial properties to add to Denton Hotel's portfolio. It's a prospective property I'm excited about. Located in upstate New York. It's one of the oldest luxury hotels in the state. He had a smile on his face as he clicked through the listing's photos of the property. It was my favorite Christmas destination as a child. And it's currently on the market. She blinked and cocked her head. I know that place. I grew up down the street. Josh spun in his chair to look at her. What? Yeah. She shrugged, reaching for her beer again but then deciding against it. It's so beautiful, especially in the winter. It looks like something out of a Christmas movie. Wait. You're from Cedar Grove? How did I not know this? Chapter 3. Josh. Cedar Grove Hotel and Spa wasn't just any regular hotel property going up for grabs. No, this place was family-owned and operated. It had generations' worth of history, and the owners, a married couple set to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary this Christmas season, were very clearly searching for the right buyer. Which meant price, or the thickness of the wad of money Josh was prepared to offer, didn't matter. At all. They wanted a family-oriented buyer, and Josh was the farthest thing from it. Both he and his brother Mitch had graced the covers of enough regional magazines and gossip sites touting the Billionaire brothers' single status that would make it impossible for him to pretend otherwise. Unless. He must have spent too much time staring at his computer screen in thought, because Amelia finally said, Josh? Secretly pleased that she'd not only used his first name, but had shortened it to Josh, he clicked through a few screens as a new idea occurred to him. Are you planning to go out there to view the property and make an offer? What do you need from me? Amelia asked. I'm thinking. Josh worked his jaw back and forth, swinging to face Amelia. He studied the top of his desk, lost in thought. So, Amelia reached for pen on his desk and clicked the top. Are we trip planning? Do you know the owners of the Cedar Grove Hotel? He blurted. She knit her brows. Not personally, no. But I think their youngest might have been a few grades above me in high school. Prickles spread through his gut. He was on to something here. And you're, single, right? He hated that the words hadn't flowed easily for him. When she'd started working for him directly, she'd had a boyfriend, but along the way he'd caught wind that situation had dissolved. He made it a point not to inquire into her love life. Deep down, a part of him worried he'd get jealous, which was ridiculous. Her brows formed a ridge. Yes. He drew a fortifying breath as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The plans he'd wanted Amelia to make were for him to visit Cedar Grove and woo the owners himself. But what if he included her in the mix, and they just happened to think she was his doting fiancée? I need you to hear me out before you storm out of here and go straight to HR to file a complaint against me, he began. Well, this should be interesting, she said. Why are you saying it like that? She lifted her hand and pointed to his desk while waggling her finger. Have you already forgotten the events of what? She looked at her wrist as though she was wearing a watch. 45 minutes ago? Okay. He raised a palm. I get it. He fought a smile. I have an idea. She sighed exaggeratedly, pushing her glasses back up her nose and cocking her head, but he could see the smile gracing her lips. As she shifted in the chair, the front slit of her blouse opened, and he caught a glimpse of the fascinating landscape beneath, pure cleavage and creamy skin. His gut tightened. The owners of the resort, Stan and Betty Lewis, have a particular type of buyer in mind for their resort. I had originally intended to go out there hoping to woo them with everything Denton hotels could offer the resort, but depending on who would be offering competing offers, the biggest hurdle I'd need to get past is my single status. He paused, wetting his bottom lip as he raked his gaze over her. She had to agree to the plan. He'd make sure she couldn't say no. Now I want you to come with me and pretend to be my fiancé. Amelia's eyes went saucer-wide. What? Do I need to repeat myself? She scoffed. Josh. I can't do that. That's my hometown, everyone there knows me. Except the Cedar Grove owners. She paused. It's not like I'm going to ask you to do this without compensation, he went on. What do you think? Quadruple time for the duration of the trip, plus a bonus if they agree to my offer to buy the resort. She blinked. Like, for every hour we're gone? He nodded. How long will the trip be? Probably a week, Josh said, his heart rate picking up. Just say yes. I promise, it won't eat into your Christmas vacation time. We'll finish up right before you'd be heading home for the holidays anyway. Her crystal blue eyes went wider, cheeks stained pink. You're kidding me. I'm not. I need you to do this. Please. She deflated slightly. But, Josh, you want me to lie. It's true I don't know the owners, but I know everybody else. The people in my hometown have known me since I was a baby. My parents live there, and so do my brother and his family. I don't think I can do this. If money won't convince you, then what will? Amelia nibbled at her bottom lip, the lip that he had imagined kissing only in his weakest moments. He looked away. He knew better than to mix business and pleasure, which was why this idea felt safe to him. Amelia posing as his fiancée was pure business. And he'd make sure to keep it that way by making sure she was fairly compensated. Honestly? A promotion. Her words fell with a thud. He frowned, letting the idea percolate through him. You're sick of being my assistant? He tried to joke it off, but the fear was real. He would be lost without her backing him up and keeping his life organized. Definitely not sick of it. When I accepted the position of your assistant, I'd hoped to learn from you, which I have, with the intent to move up the ladder. She softened a moment later, like maybe she'd noticed that he was worried. Trust me, I love working with you. But I want to be a location scout. I want to search for new properties to add to the hotel portfolio. I love the idea of being out on location searching for hidden gems. He couldn't fight the grin. Hidden gems? She nodded so hard, her glasses slipped back down her nose and she pushed them back. You get so excited when you come across a unique property. And then when you manage to turn it around and make it better? I want to do that too. That amount of travel will give you no time for a personal life. She shrugged, not even flinching. I already don't have one of those, so no big deal. Why haven't you applied for any of the open higher-level positions? You mean in marketing or accounting? No thanks. I'd still be stuck behind a desk all day. And the location scout roles are hard to get because everyone seems to love their job and doesn't want to leave. He hesitated. I really hate the thought of losing you as my assistant. But, he shook his head, allowing the truth to settle into him. I knew this day would come. She batted her eyelashes at him, an infectious grin overtaking her face. So? You'll do it? If you'll come on this trip with me and help me secure the hotel, he said, the words coming out heavy, then yes. You'll get your promotion and the money. Amelia squealed and leaped out of the chair, pumping her fist in the air. Then you have a deal. Chapter 4. Amelia. It was after 10 and Amelia could barely think for how anxious she was for Josh to get there. Mixed emotions swirled inside her, making it difficult to concentrate on the remaining tasks she needed to do before leaving. She'd packed 18 pairs of underwear, mindlessly stuffing her panties into the suitcase before realizing just how many she planned to take. She could pee her pants twice a day and still be fine. Not that she planned on it. All she could think about was this getaway and how she was supposed to spend a full week up in Mr. Denton's, Josh's business without losing her cool. When he'd first offered her money, she'd almost said yes. At that hourly rate, she could pay off the last of her student loans and have enough left over to put a sizable down payment on a newer car with working AC, not that she needed it right now. But then when she had the idea about the promotion, she figured it couldn't hurt to ask, never anticipating that he'd agree to both. This was either going to turn into her dream come true or an absolute nightmare, and she still wasn't sure which. She would never admit it to anyone, but she'd been crushing on her boss since the day she'd started working for him. As it was, staying unaffected around the man required a fair degree of compartmentalization. The guy was sex on legs and didn't even know it. It was like he had no interest in exploiting his sex appeal via flirtation or dating or anything. Least of all with her. Not that she'd been hoping for any hint of interest from him. Nope. It was for the better, though. Dating her boss wasn't wise, and besides, if things got ugly, she didn't want to lose her position within Denton Hotels. She loved her job there and working with Josh had given her a taste for the location scout role. And it's not like she'd never see him. The location scouts all fell under business development, so she'd still interact with him, but not daily and probably mostly via email and Zoom. More importantly, if she got out from under the penetrating, stormy blue gaze of Josh, she might be able to find any other man attractive again and maybe even find a boyfriend. Like she had once, pre-Josh. Not that it was his fault she'd broken things off with her ex. She couldn't abide cheaters. As Amelia did a final sweep of the apartment, making sure she packed her good heels, her best work dresses and every single pair of earrings she owned, a horn honked from outside. It had to be Josh. She scurried to the window facing the street, a gasp rocketing out of her once she saw what awaited her at the curb. A limo. An honest-to-God stretch limousine. Oh, hell no, she groaned, pushing the window up so she could lean out and shout at him from the third story. Josh exited the back of the car, and she barked out, "Hey! Up here." His grin was a mile wide. "What do you think?" How about no?" she asked, her teeth chattering a little from the cold December air. "Josh, do you know where we're going?" He narrowed his eyes, shutting the door gently. His dark waves were looser than he normally kept them at the office, and without his nicely pressed suit, his weekend vibes were strong. His jeans were the perfect amount of distressed, and his sexy black leather jacket reeked of money. "Cedar Grove, obviously," he said, heading toward the apartment building. "Yes, and Cedar Grove is a small town, a family-oriented place. It's like, secretly the set of every Hallmark Christmas movie ever made." "Really?" "Not really, but I'm saying it's not the place to bring a limo, unless you want to prove to everyone you're some rich jerk from the city who can barely turn down the side street to get to Dax's bakery." He sighed, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Okay. You have a point." I know I do. We'll take my car. Josh looked annoyed, but he didn't fight her on it. She popped back inside the window and shut it tight, then shrugged on her heavy fur-trimmed wool coat. Only the best for Cedar Grove this time around. After all, if anybody asked her why she looked so dolled up, she had an arsenal of excuses at the ready. First and foremost, she was a big city girl now working for one of the largest hotel magnates in the country. The fact that Christmas was in a week was also a good fallback. Everyone seemed to love dressing up for the holidays, and Amelia was no exception. But dressing up to impress her rich city slicker fiancé? That was the last excuse she wanted to use. Even though nobody would necessarily blame her for it. She hated the idea of anyone thinking that she would change herself for a man, for a relationship. Because if there was anything that she strove to project in her life, it was the fact that her career was her life and everything else came after. Which was, ironically, what had gotten her into this fake boyfriend situation in the first place. Make that fake fiancé. When she hit the sidewalk outside her brick walk-up in Brooklyn, Josh was unloading his rolling suitcase and talking to the limo driver. He slammed the trunk shut, and the driver got into the car and drove away. Hope he's not sad to miss the Cedar Grove trip, Amelia said, tugging her keys out of her coat pocket. My hatchback is in the garage around the corner. It's not far. She hoisted her big purse higher up her shoulder and started pulling her rolling suitcase. Josh shook his head, easing the handle out of her hand. Let me, he said sternly, pulling both suitcases behind him. You might tip over in those heels, with the weight you have in that purse. It looks like if you swing it too far in one direction, you'll go with it. She scoffed but couldn't ignore the ripple of delight that coursed through her. She had a soft spot for traditional gestures of chivalry, even though she prided herself on being independent and self-sufficient. She would never admit how much it made her melt on the inside. You know I'm perfectly capable of pulling my own rolling luggage, right? Just getting myself ready for the next week, Josh said. Ah, that's right. She tightened her grip on the strap of her purse. My doting fake fiancé. You're going to have to sound more excited than that if you want to convince the Lewises that we're devoted to each other. She sighed, steeling herself against the flutter in her belly. She hung a left before the intersection and led him through the pedestrian entrance of the parking garage. You know, you could have included some training on how to be your fake fiancé before this, she teased, thankful he couldn't glean how hard her heart hammered in her chest. I think we'll be able to figure it out on the fly, Josh mused, sending her a mischievous smile. You've been my assistant for 2 years. You know me better maybe than my brother does. A sarcastic laugh erupted from her, but he wasn't entirely wrong. She did know him better than a lot of other people in his life. Hell, the only thing they hadn't broached before this was the romantic realm. And hopefully that would still be the case after these next few days. Amelia unlocked her car once it was in sight, and the lights of her black hatchback blinked rapidly. Once they reached the back of the car, Josh held out his hand. I unlocked it, she said. The trunk should be open. I know. But give me the keys. I'm driving. She blinked. Why? Because fiancés always drive. That's the rule. Amelia held the keys out of reach and looked him up and down. I always see you riding in the back of cars. Are you sure you remember how to drive? Josh pressed his hand to his chest and tried to look shocked. I'll have you know that I'm an excellent driver. He kept his hand palm up and wiggled his fingers. Gimme. She huffed, but passed the keys over anyway, trying to fight the grin. Having a hot-as-hell fake fiancé wasn't so bad after all. For now, at least. Chapter 5. Josh. The first half of the car ride with Amelia at his side went about as Josh expected, full of jokes and work conversation. When they stopped for hot chocolate halfway through, his normally talkative assistant was quiet as she sipped her drink. What's wrong? He asked her, casting glances her way. Nothing's wrong. But he could tell from her answer that wasn't true. Reaching out, he squeezed her hand. Is there something we should talk about before we get there? So many things, but, she shrugged. I know you said we could figure things out on the fly, but I'd feel better if we had some sort of talking points. Josh loosened his grip on the steering wheel, glad she didn't have cold feet. That makes sense. So, where did we meet? Work? And how long have we known each other? 2 years. Okay, how about something harder? What's my favorite beer? Anything from Dogfish Head Brewery, duh. And you can't tell the difference between an IPA and a pale ale. I think we've got it. It was almost 4 p.m. when they hit Cedar Grove, and by the time they pulled up to the brick-laid driveway winding through the expansive property of Cedar Grove Hotel and Spa, Josh felt like he was stepping back in time. Holy shit, he whispered, slowing Amelia's car to a crawl as he peered through the windshield at their surroundings. Pine trees dotted the rolling hills of the front lawn, which was coated in a fine sheen of white snow. It had started flurrying halfway there, and the tracks from a previous car were barely visible on the brick path beneath them. Beautiful, isn't it? Like a Christmas card. It looks just like I remember it, Josh said, drawing a deep breath. He crept along the path at 5 miles per hour, drinking in as much as he could. He gasped when he saw the first gnomes, tiny little statues nestled in the grass. They'd been more famous than the Taj Mahal for him during his childhood. There they are. Just like I remember. Amelia snorted. How many times have you been here? Used to come every Christmas with my family, Josh said, squeezing the steering wheel. They'd even come the final Christmas before his mother had passed. It had been a bittersweet reunion, knowing that she wouldn't outlive her cancer to see another Christmas after it. But spending one last Christmas in their favorite place as an entire family was a memory he still cherished. I'm surprised we never ran into each other, Amelia mused. Josh followed the curving brick path down a hill, where the big, cabin-like hotel stood proud. If the exterior was slightly rustic with a touch of neglect, the interior more than made up for it. He couldn't wait to see if it had changed, and how, on the inside. I always used to play an angel in the nativity play the church put on here, she said. Josh cast a glance her way. Of course she'd be an angel, with those icy eyes and strawberry blonde locks, which she had pulled back in a braid instead of her usual librarian bun. Tell me there's photographic evidence. Bursting with it, I'm afraid. Well then, I'll need to see it before I release your bonus check. She scoffed, swatting him on the arm as he pulled into the cul-de-sac, hugging the big front doors. When he cut the engine, she said, I can't believe you're haggling to see my old church pics. I'll haggle if I want to, he shot back. You ready for this? Mr. Lewis knows we're arriving, so it's game on once we get inside. Amelia nodded, chin lifted. I was born ready, Denton. He laughed, shaking his head. Good to know, MacTaggart. They swept inside the hotel, where the big, atrium-style foyer greeted them. Everything was just as he remembered, the glass-paned dome looking up into the heavens, the log cabin siding lending an earthy scent to the air, the colorful, unique rugs across the floors. Then there was the decorations, some of them dating back decades, daring anyone who entered not to fall in love with Christmas. It hasn't changed a bit, Josh murmured as he looked around. But that wasn't entirely a good thing. Sure, it was great for the trip down memory lane. But he guessed the place hadn't been updated in all the years since he'd last visited. His mother had passed more than 10 years ago, and even then, the hotel had seemed a staid reminder of years past. The Lewis family had barely touched this place, which meant the next owners had a lot of work cut out for them, and he wouldn't know what problems lay beneath it all until he could get a formal inspection. I just love this place, especially around the holidays. They know how to do it right, Amelia said, pulling her coat around her tighter. He glanced at her, catching her Arctic gaze. A shiver raced through him. Amelia was beautiful on any given day. But here, right now? With that wonder shining in her eyes? Josh's mind went blank, and he struggled to remember what she'd said. He gazed at her for a moment too long, not even noticing when a hotel employee approached them. May I help you too? The clerk asked. Hello. Josh snapped back to the present, feeling his clarity return to him now that he wasn't staring at Amelia like some lovesick teenager. We're Josh and Amelia, here to visit with Mr. and Mrs. Lewis during our stay. Ah, yes. We've been expecting you. Please follow me. The clerk led them toward a sweeping wooden reception desk, where he checked them in quickly. Before they were handed their room keys, Mr. Lewis breezed toward them with a big smile on his face. You must be Joshua Denton, Mr. Lewis boomed, offering a solid handshake. His white hair was slicked back stylishly, and the man's frame looked like he was a retired linebacker. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir, Josh said, returning the man's firm grip. I'm here with my fiancée, Amelia MacTaggart. Great to meet you, sir, Amelia said, offering her hand and a bright smile. In fact, I think Amelia is acquainted with your children, Josh went on. He'd been looking forward to dropping that detail early on. I believe she went to school with your kids. Class of 2015, Amelia clarified. CGHS. Well, I'll be damned, Mr. Lewis said, looking at Amelia like she'd just performed a magic trick. Yes, this link was proving to be a very good idea. But he couldn't get too excited. Not yet. A homegrown Grover looking to buy the hotel? Amelia smiled sweetly. He wanted to high-five her. We've been so eager to visit the hotel during the holiday, Josh went on, slipping his hand over the small of Amelia's back. He brought her closer to him, flush against his body. The warmth made it hard to think, but he pressed on. I used to come here each holiday season with my family growing up, as well. It looks just like I remember. I'm very pleased to hear that, Mr. Lewis said, bowing his head slightly. Now grab your keys. Let me show you to your room, and I'll tell you about the fun lineup of activities we have planned. A porter had loaded their bags on a cart already, so Josh grabbed the room keys and kept his hand on the small of her back, unwilling, maybe even unable, to break this connection now that it was opened. I always knew you'd be a possessive boyfriend, Amelia murmured as they followed Mr. Lewis down a moose-themed hallway. Josh snorted with laughter. Just need everyone to know that you're mine. Next time, bring the collar, she said from the side of her mouth as they headed for the elevators. Mr. Lewis awaited them inside, waving them closer. You're funny, Mealy, he said as he stepped into the elevator. Amelia arched a brow, which he could see in the mirrored walls of the elevator car. Oh, please. Not as funny as you, Joshy. Josh didn't bother hiding the grin as the elevator soared upwards. This arrangement wasn't anything he'd tried before, but he suspected that being fake engaged to Amelia was going to be a lot of fun. Chapter 6. Amelia. Once Mr. Lewis, or Stan as he insisted they call him, had left their room, Amelia and Josh looked around in silence for a few moments. There was a lot to take in. It wasn't only the elegant luxury suite, but also the lingering sensation of Josh being so close to her. She wasn't immune to the shift in energy once he'd put his hand on her. Even though she'd teased him when they were out in the hall, it still felt possessive. Or maybe she was imagining it all, but a part of her didn't want to know the answer. Whatever it was, her head was spinning now that they were alone in this gorgeous room. They put rose petals on the bed, Josh said, chuckling. She walked farther into the suite, staring at the king-size bed. It's so pretty, she murmured, looking around. In the attached living room, there was a couch. And this bed. Which meant, where will we sleep? Josh blinked, and slowly the realization crept across his face too. I couldn't have asked for a room with 2 beds, he said. I'll sleep on the couch, Amelia suddenly said, feeling like she needed to draw this line in the sand. Even though there was plenty of room for both of them to splay out and not touch each other in that huge bed, it seemed wise not to tempt fate. No, Josh said. I really don't want you to do that. I mean, look at this bed. We can both fit, as well as about 3 others. I promise I'll keep my hands to myself. She narrowed her eyes playfully as her heart rate picked up. Better not to think about what it might be like if he didn't keep his hands to himself. You better, because I didn't see anything about consummating the fake engagement on the agenda. Josh laughed, but it sounded nervous. Maybe even forced. Of course, Amelia's cheeks went hot, as she regretted what she said. To him, the idea of having sex with her was probably laughable. Why would a man like him want to sleep with his assistant? She'd done enough social media stalking to see that she didn't fit the profile of the women he dated, if the photos of him with his last girlfriend was an indicator, which Amelia was sure it was. She had no idea why it didn't work out or who had ended it. But if that was who Josh went for? Then, personality aside, Amelia couldn't even hope to compete. Only after a full year and a half in NYC did she finally splurge on her first set of name-brand heels. She put a stop to the direction her thoughts were going. What was she thinking? That she and her boss had a chance at something real? She was too realistic for that. Besides, she had career goals, and those didn't involve being in a relationship. If you sleep on the couch, it might look suspicious, Josh went on. The maids will be in here every day, and it might somehow get back to the Lewises. It'll be better to share. Fine. She flopped back onto the bed, sighing as her body sank into the cloud-soft mattress. She'd been wrong to think that there had ever been a glimmer of attraction between them, even if it was only for 30 seconds a half hour ago. Her time here with him was business, not personal. I suppose I can't complain. This mattress is amazing. Josh surprised her by sitting down on the bed, and then laying back so they were side by side. He let out a groan. You're right. This does feel good. Especially after spending 5 hours on the road in that tiny car of yours, when we would have been far more comfortable in the limo. She was not going to contemplate what kind of fun they might have had in the limo while someone else drove them to Cedar Grove. While I won't deny that, if we had arrived in that ginormous vehicle, you would still be calling Stan Mr. Lewis. That, I can guarantee. Chuckling, he tapped her elbow with his own before sitting up. You're probably right. Amelia watched him get up, then open his suitcase and rummage through the contents, removing neatly pressed slacks, trendy ties, and a small stack of black boxer briefs. Her mind refused to stop speculating on what it might be like to be Josh Denton's girlfriend. She needed to get it together. This was a job. Nothing more. At the same time, she couldn't help feeling sad that someone like Josh could be inches from her, yet be so far out of her reach. She'd made a bad choice when she agreed to this idea. Sure, the money would be great, as would the promotion. But more than that, this trip would serve as a reminder of the one thing she worked daily to ignore. She was secretly in love with her boss and had been since the day he'd hired her. ####. Amelia and Josh took their time settling in and freshening up for that evening's festivities, the Cedar Grove Hotel tree lighting ceremony. It was a separate occasion from the town's tree lighting, which took place right after Thanksgiving. Their trip just so happened to coincide with this very popular event, so of course all of Amelia's family would be here and ready to meet the fiancé. When she'd texted her mom to let her know that she'd be coming home early for a work trip, with plans to stay on through Christmas, her mother had been ecstatic. When Amelia had hinted at wanting her to meet someone special, her mother had about blasted the phone open with exclamation marks. Amelia had intended to leave the fiancé bit out, since that was purely for the Lewises' sake. But of course her family couldn't leave well enough alone, and Amelia's attempt to keep the fiancé part quiet lasted approximately 5 minutes. I hope you're ready for, like, all the hugs, Amelia warned Josh once she'd touched up her lipstick in the bathroom. My parents have been waiting for me to find someone since the second my older brother got engaged. Now he has a kid and another one on the way, so basically this is a sigh of relief for them. Josh hummed. Won't they be upset when we don't end up getting married? They'll get over it. Sometimes, I think their push for me to settle down and get married is more for them than me. They don't understand that I want to work on my career first. She laughed, but to her ears, it sounded hollow. Josh stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror, grabbing for a sweater hanging over the back of the armchair. He'd taken off his leather coat once they arrived at the suite, and the sight of his toned forearms with a smattering of hair on them left her wishing to see more. You don't plan on getting married? He asked before tugging the sweater over his head. Not right now. I want to focus on my career. Josh arranged his sweater, turning to her with a smile on his face. Good. A grandmother's knitted rendition of a sleigh being pulled by reindeer greeted her. She snorted. "Looks like you're ready for an ugly sweater party." "That's why I brought it." He reached for his leather jacket again. "It's an ugly conversation starter." Amelia snickered. "You're planning to win over Stan and his wife with your sweater?" "Absolutely." He flashed her a grin that made her belly tighten. "You ready to go?" "Wait. Something's missing." He looked her up and down before snapping his fingers. "Your glasses. Where are they?" Laughing, she tapped her temple. "Contacts." Amelia scooped up her coat and tucked her phone and a keycard into a pocket before following him out of the suite. Everywhere she looked, the holiday decorations filled every open space, challenging anyone to deny that the Cedar Grove Hotel and Spa was the place to go if you wanted to do Christmas right. It was a short walk to where the crowds were already gathering, and they passed groups of people all decked out for the holidays. Josh tapped her elbow and gestured to another man wearing an almost identical Christmas sweater but in a different color. "See? There's another person with excellent taste in holiday attire." Amelia rolled her eyes and grumbled. "In your dreams, Joshy." Josh took her hand, tucking it on his arm. "Oh Meli, what must we do to get you in the holiday spirit? Maybe we should find you an elf hat to wear." "Oh, hell no." Amelia was saved from further teasing when they reached their destination. The enormous pine tree was the epicenter of the back property, and the oversized decorations, some of them going back to when the hotel was first built, lent credence to how much Christmastime dominated the hotel. Fat silver and red balls dangled from the branches, and lights were strung around the tree awaiting the countdown for the tree lighting. Excitement welled up within her. Attending this lighting ceremony was one of her family's longest-running traditions. When she looked at Josh, she could see the same excitement shining in his face. "I haven't been to one of these in so long," he said softly, almost reverently, as they wound through the gathering crowds. Amelia and her family planned to meet up by the Santa statue, which was also on display year-round. Just when she saw the red tip of the statue's hat, Amelia's mom shouted for her. "Oh, honey. Over here." Amelia saw her family, bundled up and gathered by the enormous jolly old Saint Nick. Her mom and dad waved, breath puffing in front of them, while her brother held her 2-year-old niece in his arms, and his round-bellied wife waved at his side. "Hey, everyone." Amelia rushed forward, hugging everyone quickly. "Meet Josh. Josh, these are my parents, Tom and Susan MacTaggart, my brother Rob and his wife Rebecca, and this little sweetie is my niece Elise." Josh started a round of handshakes, and she couldn't help but sigh a little as he flashed that winning grin to each and every family member. Already, her mother was shooting stars out of her eyes. "I didn't even know she was dating anyone," her mom said to Josh, much less engaged. "And look at you, all decked out in that sweater." "That's because we are discreet," Amelia said, shoving her hands into her coat pockets, and wanted to wait until the time was right. "No better time than Christmas," Josh said, his broad smile feeling contagious. Elise said something between English and toddler. Amelia put her face close to Elise's, making kissy noises. "You sweet little pumpkin," Amelia said, running her fingers through Elise's sandy blonde hair. "You're getting so big. Do you even remember who I am?" Elise looked unimpressed and buried her head into her daddy's shoulder. "It's been a minute, huh?" Amelia said. "Well, you didn't come home for Thanksgiving," her mother started. "I was working," Amelia said. "I told her she needed to go home," Josh piped up, his voice pure friendliness and bass. "To see you all and spend time with family. I wanted to come with, so we could share the good news. But your daughter is so committed to her career, even I couldn't drag her away." Her mother cooed, squeezing Amelia's arm. "That's my baby girl." "So how did you propose?" Rebecca asked, her eyes twinkling. Rebecca was a girl's girl through and through, and Elise was dressed in tutus and pink bows more often than not. "Oh, the proposal." Amelia turned to Josh, hoping he could see her panic through her forced grin. They really should have talked about this more on the way here. He squeezed his arm around her, bringing her to his side. It was a beautiful evening, Josh said, looking into Amelia's eyes. That gaze erased some of her anxiety about needing to come up with a story on the fly. Whatever he said, she'd accept. As long as he kept looking at her like that. I took her down to Central Park, where we walked along the lake at the golden hour. That sounds romantic, her mother said. Until the geese attacked, Amelia blurted. She couldn't make this too lovey-dovey. Yeah, that sort of ruined my vibe, Josh said effortlessly, laughing. They actually pecked at my ankles. But you know what they say about geese and lasting love, Amelia said, smiling up at Josh. Rob snorted. Do they say anything about geese and lasting love? Amelia swatted at her brother's arm. No, they don't, but come on, we have to make it romantic. Everyone laughed, and Amelia hoped the terror she felt inside wasn't transmitting. She really didn't like this, lying to her family. She hadn't expected to have to make up stories and perform in front of them. She needed a diversion, and fast. She spotted a beverage table farther down the brick walkway. Hey, guys, I'm gonna go grab a soda. Does anyone want anything? Nobody did, so she squeezed Josh's wrist. I'll be right back. Just feeling a little parched. Amelia hurried over to the line forming in front of the table, hopping from foot to foot as she tried to counsel herself about the fact that she'd just told the biggest lie of her life to her family. It's not like anyone would be outraged if they found out it was a sham engagement, but it didn't feel great. Her family were good people and only wanted the best for her. And apparently her best was pretending to be in love with her boss and raking in thousands of dollars for it. She was so lost in thought by the time she got up to the table that she startled when someone said, "Hey, Amelia." The lady behind the table smiled at her from under a floppy red Santa hat. Long time no see. It was Judy, her parents' neighbor. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I spaced out. How are you, Judy? The two chit-chatted while Judy poured Amelia a big plastic cup of punch. After they'd caught up on her job in NYC and Judy's kids moving abroad, Judy said, "Take a second one, but don't tell anyone I gave you two." Amelia laughed and thanked her, moving out of the way so the line could continue. She took a sip of the punch, delicious and cherry-infused. She hummed and then took a gulp. Extremely refreshing. She needed to ask Judy for the recipe. She downed the entire first cup before she started the walk back to her family and started in on the second as she rejoined the group. Josh was in the middle of telling a story that had everyone on pins and needles, even Elise. Amelia watched as he spoke, admiring his perfect hairline and his dark, bushy brows. Everything about him was perfect, at least what she'd seen of him so far. Prickles of heat swept through her, and she laughed just as hard as everyone else once Josh finished his story. The anxiety was slowly dissipating now, bleeding out into a contented buzz. When Josh put his arm around her this time, she burrowed into his embrace. Feeling exactly like she belonged there. "You two are just so cute," her mom cooed, squeezing Amelia's arm. "So in love. Come on, let's take some pictures." Her mom pulled her phone out and gestured for everyone to stand closer together. Flagging down a passing server, she handed him her phone and they spent the next couple of minutes posing for a group photo. When the server handed her phone back, her mom had tears in her eyes when she swiped through the different pics. Amelia's phone pinged with a text and she found that her mom had sent her some of the pics. "Aw, check us out. You really stand out in the Christmas sweater," she teased as she showed Josh. If, by stand out, you mean devilishly handsome, then yes, you are definitely correct. She couldn't help snorting. "Well, I wouldn't go that far." "I'm pretty sure you told me that recently," he said, as he grinned. Rolling her eyes, she swatted his arm. "No, I said you were easy on the eyes. Not devilishly handsome. Keep up, Joshy." Wrapping his arms around her, he hugged her from behind. "It's hard not to be in love with your daughter, the way she keeps me on my toes," Josh said, looking down at Amelia. He sent her a smile that would have erased every doubt and confirmed every desire, if only this weren't acting. Still, Amelia let herself get lost in his gaze. Get lost in the fantasy. Because soon enough, reality would set in and they'd be back to nothing more than work colleagues, and Amelia suspected that was going to be far more painful than having to explain the deception to her family. Chapter 7. Josh. Stan and Betty Lewis joined their group a bit later, with handshakes all around. Josh was relieved that Stan had organically run into them while with Amelia's family. Turned out that Stan had gone to the same school as Amelia's father and they were friendly with each other still, which was all the better. Amelia laughed into his arm, prompted by nothing. She'd been a little giggly this evening. He glanced down at her. "Everything okay?" She snorted and righted herself. "Everything's fine." A moment went by, and then she burst into laughter again. "What are you laughing at?" "Just, all of it." She waved her hand in front of her. "Hey, this punch is really good." She lifted her empty cup. "You want some? I'm gonna go get another one." "Wait." He grabbed her hand, bringing his face level with hers, even though he had to hunch to do it. "What's in that punch?" "I dunno, it was the punch they had over there." Her cheeks were ruddy, but that could have been from the cold. But he would swear she was slurring. It was slight, but there. "Are you sure it's not spiked?" She narrowed her eyes, then her mouth rounded. "Oh, I wonder." "Because I was nervous, and the punch made me feel better." "Uh-huh." He straightened, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "You stay here with me, drunkie. I don't want you falling on the icy ground or deciding to crawl under the Christmas tree to take a nap." She snickered again, wrapping both her arms around his waist. He couldn't ignore the thrill of contentment this prompted. Had it been so long since he'd been touched by a woman? Or was it just because it was Amelia finally touching him in the way he denied wanting from her? Stan stepped closer to them, a big smile on his face. "Look at you two lovebirds. You remind me of me and my wife when we were young." His wife swatted Stan's chest. "He doesn't mean to say married life goes downhill. It keeps getting better, we promise." "When's the big date?" Stan asked. Josh started. "June 3rd, Amelia blurted. "I love spring weddings," Rebecca cooed while she rubbed her belly. "You're a lucky father-in-law," Stan said, clapping his hand against Amelia's father's shoulder. "To have the son of the Denton Empire courting your daughter? It's truly an honor that Denton Hotels is even interested in Cedar Grove." His wife murmured her agreement, while Amelia's dad beamed. "We feel just as lucky, but mostly, we're pleased for our daughter," he said. Inside, Josh pumped his fist. They'd been here less than a full day and already everything looked very promising. But he had enough business experience not to get his hopes up yet. Not until he had the signed contract in hand. "I'd just like to say," Amelia piped up, "that I feel the luckiest of all." Amelia's drunken honesty raised alarms for him. How drunk was she, and what might she reveal without thinking? Even an off-the-cuff drunk remark could raise suspicions. He squeezed his arm around her waist, pressing a kiss to the side of her head. "Wrong," Josh countered. "I'm the luckiest." "I'd say we're all pretty dang lucky," Amelia's mom spoke up. Amelia looked up at him, questions swirling in her eyes, a type of raw honesty he'd never seen there before. But they didn't have a chance to delve further, because the lights on the patio dimmed and Christmas music filled the air. Per tradition, the instrumental version of Silent Night played while a procession of schoolchildren holding candles filled the brick paths. Their voices soon joined the musical accompaniment. When Josh looked down at Amelia, he swore tears were shining in her eyes. Once the song ended, the crowd erupted with applause. Some school kids smiled back, while others fidgeted in their spots. An announcer took the mic and greeted the crowd. "Josh, let's move closer." Amelia took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, and urged him forward. They crept along a line of hedges, inching closer to the spectacle. She tipped her head back and sighed. "Right here is good." He grinned, distracted by the wisps of blonde hair that had escaped her knit hat. She looked every inch a winter beauty, with her wool coat and plaid scarf and ruddy cheeks. When she glanced up at him, nervousness flashed across her face. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "Can't I admire my fiancé?" he asked. The corners of her mouth turned upward. "Only if you kiss her, too." Her comment stunned as much as it thrilled. He ran his fingers along the line of her cap, brushing over those flyaway hairs. "I mean, we need to convince people," she said in a softer voice, and then pushed up onto her tiptoes to kiss him. He wasn't one to argue. The brush of her lips against his was soft, barely there. But the electricity it provoked was very real, and very there. He cupped the sides of her face, diving headfirst into this unexpected turn of events. Convince people. Sure. They were tucked away near the line of hedges. Her family stood half a football field away. This kiss wasn't for their sake. It was for themselves. And he loved it. Amelia drew a ragged breath, deepening the kiss, clutching at the front of his coat. When her mouth parted, his body came to attention. Damn, he hadn't counted on this. Kisses so good he'd be left fantasizing about them for the next 6 months. She released a small whimper and collapsed against him. Josh steadied her, drawing deep breaths that left clouds and question marks in the air between them. Suddenly, lights blared behind them. Josh twisted to see, the tree had been lit. White and gold lights twinkled, completely filling the tree with light. They'd been so engrossed in making out that they'd missed the announcement. "Wow," Amelia said, resting her head against his chest. "That's even better than fireworks." Josh wrapped his arms around her, enjoying the view with her heat pressed against him. They stayed like that for a long time. So long, in fact, that Josh forgot that nobody was watching them. They didn't need to be acting the part right now. But it felt too good to abandon. Somehow, getting lost in this fantasy with Amelia felt better and more right than anything he'd done in a very long time. Maybe that's what 2 years of suppressed attraction had done to him. Turned him into a desperate man, willing to accept forced displays of affection as authentic. Josh was partially to blame for this. He'd dated on and off over the years, many of them not particularly serious given the hours he tended to work. His last girlfriend, Hannah, had business aspirations of her own, which made them a good fit as they both understood that work often came first. He'd been considering taking things to the next level with her, but then Amelia had accepted the position as his assistant. His relationship with Hannah ended pretty soon after, but he couldn't remember for the life of him what had been the cause. He just knew that Hannah had nothing on Amelia, but he'd never been able to admit it to her. Not while she was his trusted assistant. Not while everything worked perfectly as is. Chapter 8. Amelia. Dinner at Cedar Grove's best steakhouse had come and gone in a delicious blur filled with entertaining conversation as she sat with the Lewises and Josh. Amelia made sure not to lay into the wine too heavily, after her unexpected spiked punch experience the night before. Thankfully, no hangover. No, it was just plenty of regrets and embarrassment that still clung to her. The fact that she'd thrown herself at her boss, clearly unable to control her attraction any longer with her lowered inhibitions, was something she deeply regretted. Partly. Sure, they'd kissed, and hard, but it wasn't like he wanted to continue it. Josh had simply quietly wrapped up the evening, gotten her back to the suite, and she'd fallen asleep as soon as her head hit the pillow. And today? They weren't talking about it. Weren't even addressing it. Because it was better to pretend it hadn't happened. Even though his lips had practically left scorch marks against hers. "We obviously have many ideas about things we'd like to incorporate into such a gorgeous space as the hotel and its surroundings," Josh said. Amelia had missed about half the conversation, lost in her own thoughts while staring at Josh's perfect face. She'd realized, over the course of this dinner, that his celebrity twin was Liam Hemsworth. And that somehow made everything worse. Because now, Josh was even more perfect. Perfectly out of reach. "Amelia, didn't you say last night you would love to see a tulip garden planted out back?" Josh's question made her jolt to attention. Tulip garden. Had she said that while drunk? Oh, yes. Pink tulips, actually, would be my preference, but I'm open to other colors. Stan and Betty laughed, sending warm smiles their way. Josh had been right to bring her along. The owners were falling in love with them. Josh's natural charm made it hard not to like him, and Amelia's hometown girl aspect really made the whole thing a home run. Josh, as usual, was a genius. Going after what he wanted and getting it simply by being himself. Granted, his love for his mom and his happy memories at the Cedar Grove Hotel drove his reasons for wanting the property beyond the financial aspects, which would also be substantial given that the hotel always seemed busy year-round. "Amelia, is that you?" A new voice made Amelia twist around. At her side, Mrs. Pemberley smiled down at her, Amelia's 10th grade history teacher. "Mrs. Pemberley." She shot up out of her chair to hug her favorite teacher. Mrs. Pemberley was graying now but wore the same little round glasses she'd been famous for back at Cedar Grove High. "It's so good to see you." Stan and Betty greeted the older woman, who had also taught their sons. The smile on Stan's face grew even larger. Josh couldn't have planned a better unlikely reunion, and judging from the smile on his face, he could tell it was working in his favor. "This is my fiancée, Josh," Amelia blurted, feeling her cheeks get hot. "Mrs. Pemberley is my favorite teacher of all time." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Josh said, standing to offer his hand. "And now that makes you my favorite teacher of all time." Mrs. Pemberley swatted away the compliment. "I just wanted to say hello. I don't want to hold up your dinner. I need to get back to my husband. We're here celebrating 40 years together." Stan and Betty offered their congratulations, and Amelia noticed how Stan squeezed his wife's hand. They had to be close to a 40-year anniversary too. Hell, her parents were on their way to 40 years. The realization made her dizzy. And here she was, faking it for money. She wouldn't even reach her wedding day, much less her first anniversary. "Hopefully we'll make it to 40 years, Josh said with a wink in Amelia's direction, but this time, his charm couldn't sway her and her misgivings were clamoring to be heard. "It was so good to see you," Amelia said to her favorite teacher, squeezing her hand. "Enjoy the rest of your meal." Mrs. Pemberley said goodbye and disappeared into the depths of the restaurant. "One of my favorite parts about coming to Cedar Grove," Josh said, his eyes sparkling, "is seeing proof of how loved Amelia is." Amelia forced a smile, his words clanging hollowly inside her. Once again, she was questioning agreeing to the lie. The money would pay off the last of her student loans and the promotion would be a dream come true, but at what cost? She was lying to her family, she was lying to Mrs. Pemberley. The sale of this hotel would be based on a lie. Was the money really worth lying to the people who'd always loved and believed in her? When the bill came, Josh insisted on paying and managed to slip his credit card into the slim folder and hand it off to a waiter before Stan could protest. The four of them said their goodbyes at the front door of the restaurant, and both Stan and his wife hugged her before setting off. They were at that level already, on day 2. This sale was practically in the bag. They stepped out onto the sidewalk in front of the restaurant, their breaths billowing in the cold air. The gilded doors swung shut behind them, blocking out the murmur of voices that had followed them from the packed dining room. Josh nudged her with his elbow. "You okay?" She tugged her wool coat around her, thankful that its long length kept most of her warm on such a chilly night. "Yeah." They started a slow walk down the sidewalk, heading toward Amelia's car. "Want to go for a walk?" Josh asked. "It's a beautiful night and I'd love to walk off some of that meal. Especially dessert. That chocolate torte was delicious, but I didn't need to eat the whole thing." "And part of mine," she reminded him. "You kept sneaking bites off my plate when you thought I wasn't looking. I thought I was going to have to change seats with Betty. Hey now, can I help it if I love dessert?" Laughing, she felt some of the growing tension ease. It wouldn't go away entirely, but she could stop and enjoy the moment. She looked around. The entire downtown was lit up like a Christmas village. Wreaths hung from the streetlights, and enormous ornaments dangled from the doorways of storefronts. The smattering of snow that had fallen twinkled in the light like tiny crystals. It was charming in a way that made her heart ache. "Yeah. Let's take a walk." Silence settled between them as they meandered down the sidewalk. Downtown Cedar Grove was a veritable small business wonderland, with kitschy coffee shops, craft stores, her favorite used bookstore that now seemed to include a wine bar, and the toy store, with its window displays filled with amazing mechanical toys. Returning to Cedar Grove, even for a short time, always felt like a breath of fresh air after living in the hustle of the city for the past 4 years. Except now she was deceiving everyone who'd ever supported her. Regret thudded through her again. "You seem kind of off," Josh ventured after nobody had spoken for several minutes. "Is something bothering you, Amelia? Normally you're talking my ear off." She frowned as a chill went through her. Shivering against what she hoped was the cold, Amelia looked up at the gently falling snowflakes. I dunno." She sighed. "Seeing Mrs. Pemberley kind of made me feel bad. It hit me that I'm lying to everyone I know. Everyone I grew up with. Everyone that ever supported me or believed in me. And it sucks." Josh was quiet for a moment, and then he stopped walking, grabbing her arms. He made her face him, leveling her with his gaze. "Hey. I hear you. I understand what you're saying, I really do. But I promise you, this will all be worth it. While acquiring Cedar Grove Hotel and Spa will be a great boon for Denton Hotel's portfolio of properties, it's personal for me. I really want to do something with this place that would have made my mom proud. I'm sure it sounds weird given that she's dead, but if you can stick it out a little longer." Amelia nodded. "I get it. If I were in your shoes, I'd probably do the same. But I didn't think it would be this hard. I see the happiness on my mom's face and the smiles the Lewises have been giving us, and I feel guilty that we're deceiving them." She pulled her coat tighter around her. Josh brushed the snowflakes off her hair and the side of her face, which sent a jolt of heat through her. "Not enough to combat the cold, though. You're shivering. Do you want my coat?" "No, I'll survive." They started walking again. "Besides, we're not on a real date. You don't have to be chivalrous." "I don't have to be dating someone to want to be nice to them," Josh said, wrapping his arm around her. He rubbed his hand along the side of her arm. "It helped a little. Besides, you're my right-hand woman. I need to take care of you." Amelia grunted, feeling a little snarky. "Not for much longer." Josh sighed. "Did you have to remind me about that?" "You'll be fine. You'll find someone else just as capable within 2 weeks, and by summer, you will have forgotten that I was ever your assistant." She'd meant it as a joke, but Josh's face darkened, his grip around her tightening a little. "Come on. I'm not that much of an asshole. Besides, you'll still technically be reporting to me, although there will be a manager in between. I fully plan on visiting your new office to harass you once you're not my assistant. Under the guise of checking on your projects, of course." Something in his tone sent her heart rate skyrocketing. The idea of him visiting her, maintaining their friendship, that meant a lot to her. And yes, he would still be her boss, but she also knew that he dealt with the managers, not the scouts. "Do you know how to find your way around the rest of the building? You barely leave your office." Josh laughed. "Only if you send me a map before your duties as my assistant end." She couldn't squash the giggle that escaped her. "What if they transfer me to the Chicago office? Guess I'll have to plan more site inspections." Her heart raced, and she fought the urge to tip her head back and get lost in his blue gaze. They were just joking around right now. Talking like friends. Because if anything, after 2 years of working together, they were friends. But still, it was hard not to read into his comments. Hard not to let the dreaminess take flight and completely consume her. Keep it professional. She needed to remember that. Even if every inch of her body wanted to throw professionalism to the wind. Chapter 9. Josh. The two of them got up early the next day to get to work on the proposed hotel revisions. Stan had been very interested to see an overview of what, exactly, Josh planned to change if Denton Hotels became the new owner. Which meant they had a lot of work to do, and a lot of imagining beyond the tulip garden in the back. Besides, getting up early wasn't a problem when Amelia lay 2 feet away in a skimpy tank top and booty shorts, her chest rising and falling softly. Josh had spent the first hour he was awake quietly watching her, wondering what might happen if he were to press kisses to her creamy skin, working his way up to her jawline until she woke up. She was so hard to read when she used humor as a defense. Half the time, he was positive that she'd react poorly if he tried anything with her. The other half the time, he was doubtful but still not convinced. That kiss at the tree lighting didn't mean anything. She'd gotten drunk, and fast. People did silly things they didn't mean when they were drunk, and that kiss was no exception. And even though every inch of Josh wanted to push the envelope and see if she really did want more, he was hesitant to use this work trip as the test. He was paying her to be here, a lot of money. The work element changed things, and using their fake engagement as a launch pad for intimacy felt wrong. Which meant he was at a loss. Still, Amelia had asked for a half hour to wake up and start her day in the hotel gym. Josh was tempted to join her, but he knew that more skimpy clothing and increased heart rates would not bode well for beating back his attraction, which had only quadrupled in the past 48 hours. Instead, he ordered room service and took an extremely cold shower. He pulled on some sweatpants and towel-dried his hair as he sat down in front of his laptop to check email. He wasn't a minute into his work when his father called. At 8 a.m. on the dot. "Hey, Dad," Josh said, leaning back into the overstuffed chair. "Got a minute?" his dad barked. Mitchell Denton Sr. had a voice that belonged on a football field, shouting at players, instead of in a boardroom. "Sure. I was about to start on the proposed plans for the Cedar Grove property." "Ah. Cedar Grove. I forgot that's where you were right now. They still got that huge Santa statue?" Josh laughed. "Oh, yeah. And it's actually bigger than I remember. We saw the tree lighting 2 nights ago." "What a treasure," his father murmured. "You know, your mother and I started going there years before you and your brother were born." "Really?" Josh ran his finger along the shimmery seam of the armrest. "I thought we always came because it was great for kids." "Yeah, it sure is a kid's paradise, but your mother and I loved it even pre-kids." His father laughed, but it sounded melancholy. Their mother's death had left him different, sort of permanently sad in the background. Really, it had affected all of them that way. It would be a boon if you can seal the deal before the holidays. Josh perked up at the request. "Yeah? I just had that property fall through in Colorado," his dad went on. "The ski resort near Elk Lodge?" "That's the one. Such a shame, damn it." His father sighed, and Josh could almost see him rubbing at his forehead like he did whenever he was stressed. His father didn't take failure or disappointment well. "So I need you to close this deal. We need to go into Christmas with a win." Josh swallowed hard, nodding even though his father couldn't see him. "Yeah. Of course. We're really close as it is. I won't let you down." "I know you won't, son. And hey, keep Christmas Eve open. I'll make sure to find you." When Josh disconnected the call, his father's request weighed heavily on him. This hotel already was a big deal for him, but now? Failure was not an option. He needed to make the deal. The door to the suite opened a moment later, and Amelia bounded inside, glistening. Her face fell when she saw him. "Oh. Hey." He offered a quick smile, then focused on his laptop again. Anywhere other than Amelia. She wore teal workout shorts and a black sports bra, which showcased the fact that she had a very obvious tattoo of a white rose covering her ribcage on the right. Curiosity snaked through him, but he had to focus. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, it's just," she came into the living room where he was set up. She sniffed, propping her hands on her hips. "I thought that maybe there'd be breakfast." "It's on the way." Silence settled between them, and his bare chest prickled under her gaze. He might have left his shirt off on purpose. "Well," she began, rocking back on her heels, "in that case, I'm going to go shower." "I already did." He flashed a grin. "Oh. Did you?" She clucked her tongue. "Okay. Very nice. Well, I'm going to." She wandered into the bedroom, and the bathroom door shut a moment later. He smirked. This felt like a small victory somehow. And very possibly the small amount of evidence he needed that Amelia MacTaggart was definitely interested in him. Josh managed to get lost in his work as he drew up a list of proposed additions to the hotel. He could feel the same sort of blind determination that overtook him whenever something became imperative for the family business. By the time Amelia came back out, he had a 2-page list of proposed changes ready for her review. He glanced up at her, hearing the record screech in his head. Her damp hair was tousled and down, reaching her shoulders, and her usual glasses were perched on her nose, but they weren't giving him librarian vibes this time. Not with the heather gray spaghetti strap tank top and yet another pair of booty shorts she was wearing. His gaze swept her body and his mouth parted as he watched her. "Okay, I'm ready. I was thinking we could call to have a printer brought up." She glanced at him as she reached for her laptop. "Or no?" He forced his mouth shut. "That's a good idea." His body pulsed, reminding him that he couldn't even look at her now. He'd be sleeping on the couch tonight, for sure. The last threads of his restraint were about to dissolve, and he didn't know what might happen once he made the decision to go for it, with the hope that he wasn't reading all the signs wrong. A hard knock sounded on the door, and he surged to his feet to answer it. "That's probably breakfast." "Oh, goody," she said, voice huskier than normal, giving it a sexy rasp liable to send him over the edge. "I hope you got pancakes. With strawberries and cream." "You'll have to wait and find out," he called out as he opened the door. He'd love to lay out strawberries and cream all over her sexy body, but that might be going too far. For now. The server had a full tray of food on his cart, and he wheeled it in, setting everything up on the long table facing their work area. Josh tipped him a $20 bill before he left, and then got to work unveiling the spread. Coffee, soy milk for your weird ass, pancakes, waffles, yogurt, granola, and a fruit bowl. He popped a slice of cantaloupe into his mouth and chewed as he looked back at her. "Happy?" He knew the answer without her needing to say a word. She shone, basically bouncing to her feet to load up a plate. Josh popped a grape into his mouth as he watched her pick out her breakfast. "That all you're gonna eat?" she asked as she forked a pancake onto her plate, followed by a waffle. "Nah, I might have some yogurt." She huffed, tossing a grape at him. "Loser." "Damn. Is that a challenge, MacTaggart?" "No, Denton, it isn't, but this is vacation breakfast," she said, adding a pile of strawberries on top of her pancakes. "Which means, one of the few mornings of the year I don't start with yogurt or granola." "Fair enough." He forked a waffle onto a plate to appease her but still loaded up a bowl of yogurt. When they settled back into their chairs, Amelia eyed him cautiously. "I don't understand how you can eat without a shirt on." Pretty much the same as eating with a shirt on." She snorted, cutting a fat bite out of her pancake. "You can give it a try," Josh urged. "See what it's like." "Ha." She forked the pancakes into her mouth. "Not happening. I wouldn't enjoy my food if I was eating naked." "I didn't say anything about naked," Josh said, feeling even more of his professional facade crumbling away. "But if you want to take it there, I'm game." She narrowed her eyes at him, and he was thankful she couldn't tell how hard his heart pounded in his chest. That look she'd given him, though, that was a sign he needed to stay in his lane. "So, take a look at this," Josh barreled on, quickly changing the subject as he turned his laptop toward her. "I've come up with a list of proposed renovations that we could include in the plan for Cedar Grove once Denton Hotels acquires it." Amelia sat cross-legged on her chair, popping strawberries into her mouth as she read. Her brows slowly knit together the more she read. When she was done and handed the laptop back, all she said was, "This looks interesting." "You don't sound enthused." "It's a little out of left field," she said. "The Family Fun Center with a rock-climbing wall is probably the only thing on it that makes sense. But hosting presidential galas? A couples-focused hot springs edition with romantic massages? They're cool ideas, but..." "But what?" Josh asked, irritation sparking. He looked at the list again. "I need to close this deal, and fast." The bigger the better. Amelia sighed, shifting in her seat. This is like when you showed up at my apartment in a limo. Realization began prickling through him. Is it? You're losing sight of the goal, she said calmly, in the way she was so good at. The way that made them a perfect pair, at least in business. And maybe in more ways, not like Josh would ever get there to know. Focus on the parts that you loved about this place as a kid. Because that's the spirit of Cedar Grove. These galas and extreme vacation experiences are nice, but it's not right for here. You know what I'm saying? She had a point, a very good one. He could feel some of the tension from his conversation with his father unwinding, allowing clarity to return. The wheels began turning, and he revised his list with family in mind. Hours slunk by so stealthily they barely noticed. The breakfast table was slowly picked clean. Josh and Amelia had thrown a couple more grapes at each other. When only a dribble of coffee remained in the pot, Josh checked his phone and realized their time to meet with Stan was fast approaching. We need to get ready. He set his laptop aside, then stood up and stretched. Amelia's gaze sizzled on him as he scratched at his chest before wandering back into the bedroom. Let her take him in, all of him. If the sight of his bare chest would make her crack, then he'd use it to his advantage. At this point, though, it seemed like nothing would make her crack. Had he really read everything all wrong? Okay. It's go time. Amelia hopped up and followed him into the bedroom. They were quiet as they picked out clothes. Josh hazarded a glance behind him at Amelia's side of the bedroom, finding her in just a bra and panties, facing the closet. His chest tightened, and he dropped the clothes he was holding. The past 2 nights, she'd changed in the bathroom. Now, she was bold enough to change in front of him. His fingers twitched, and he forced himself to finish picking out his clothes. He shoved his sweatpants down out of sheer defiance. If she could do it, then so could he. Heart thudding, he wandered past her and only his boxer briefs on his way to the bathroom. He glanced over at her as he passed, adjusting his junk. Sorry, he said with a grin and then stepped into the bathroom. The look of shock on her face seared itself into his brain. He waited for her to follow him inside, but she didn't come. Josh gripped the edge of the marble countertop and stared at his reflection in the mirror. Not like they had time for a pre-meeting quickie anyway. There would always be time for a pre-meeting quickie with Amelia, if only she wanted it. Josh heaved a sigh, splashing cold water on his face to clear his head. Time to focus. No more teasing and coquetries. He pulled on his clothes in the bathroom, dark gray slacks and a white button-down. Casual and comfortable. When he breezed out, Amelia had slid into a long-sleeved floral print wraparound dress. She was just slipping her feet into pumps. Oh, good, we match, she said, then went into the bathroom. He finished getting ready, snapping on his watch and sliding his feet into his shoes. As he worked with his hair in the mirror, Amelia breezed out. When she glanced his way, her dark lashes and ruby-red lips stole the air from his lungs. Yes, she was ready. But she'd been ready before, too. He loved the different sides to her he was getting to know while sharing a space with her. The makeup-free Amelia was just as beautiful as the carefully curated version she presented every day at work. In fact, if he was being honest, he was desperate to have more mornings like the one they'd shared today, relaxed, in pajamas, tossing grapes at each other. On their way to the conference room, Josh spotted Stan and his wife in the hotel lobby. And shaking his hand was Colin Forrest, the owner of Forrest Family Hotels. Denton's biggest competitor. Shit. Josh stopped walking, grabbing Amelia's wrist. Do you see him? Her mouth rounded. That's Colin. Yeah. Josh raked a hand through his hair, facing Amelia. Okay. Look over there. Is that his wife and kids with him? Amelia peeked over Josh's shoulder and then nodded. Yep. Confirmed, wife and kids in tow. Shit. Josh had upped the ante by bringing his fiancée and about to form family on this trip, but Colin could easily demolish that effort with his fully formed family. His mind went into overdrive, trying to regroup. Stan is laughing at something he said, Amelia reported, still peering around Josh. "Let's take things to the next level," Josh said, gripping Amelia by the arms. "Let's say that you're pregnant." Amelia's eyes went wide. "Josh," she hissed, "are you out of your mind?" The suggestion crashed through him, and he pinched his eyes shut. "You're right. Bad idea. We're being deceptive enough with the engagement," she went on. "I'm not adding an unborn baby into the mix." Hearing those words from her lips didn't sound as weird as he'd expected. In fact, it settled rather nicely. But now wasn't the time to dig into that. "Sorry. Forget I said anything. We'll go in there and rock the plan as it is." "Yeah. That's better." Amelia straightened her back, peering around Josh again. "Okay, Colin and family are heading toward the front desk. Looks like we'll have new friends while we're in town." "Great." Adrenaline and competition raced through him in equal measure as he started his brisk, confident pace towards Stan Lewis. Just the juice he needed to make sure that he was on the closing end of this deal, and not Colin. Chapter 10. Amelia. Amelia and Josh wandered around the hotel property after their successful meeting with Stan, discussing how they'd like to see some of the transformations Josh had suggested. One of Amelia's favorite parts about working with Josh was watching his determination unfold, like an expertly arranged origami swan. Whenever he talked to his father, his energy shifted and he seemed to turn into a carbon copy of Mitchell Denton Sr. with his hyper-focus on profitability and the bottom line and limited regard for the very real people impacted by the decisions made. She was always there to remind him that it was possible to do both, be profitable and take the human element into consideration, and it seemed to be working here at the hotel. Stan had been pleased with Josh's ideas for upgrades. And whenever he was faced with direct competition, much like his father and brother, he became ruthless, determined to win. It was downright sexy to Amelia. He was a masterpiece, truly. One that she never tired of looking at and absorbing. In the afterglow of their successful meeting, Josh wanted to walk down memory lane in advance of dinner. As it was, they only had a few days left here, and Amelia was already feeling reluctant to part ways with Josh. Not just as his assistant, but as his fake fiancée. It was nice waking up with him at her side. Catching glimpses of him lost in thought, half naked, or fussing with his hair. Sharing the same living space with him, even for a few days, was far more comfortable than it had been with her last serious boyfriend. And that was saying something. Being with Josh felt natural. She just wished they could get past what had them both running hot and cold with each other. "It's really snowing," Josh remarked as they paused at a long line of windows in the sunroom. Couches faced the windows, and farther down guests lounged on the massive cushions. Josh glanced down the line, and then wrapped his arm around Amelia. "Still pretending, huh?" she teased, but burrowed deeper into his embrace. "I told you, a week." Yeah. Her heart raced as she contemplated saying the words bouncing around in her head. "If you aren't careful, I'll try to kiss you again." Josh lifted a brow. "I'd rather not be careful." "Right, because it's important that we convince perfect strangers that we're engaged," she said, feeling dizzy. Josh was the only thing grounding her right now, the warm steel of his body against her, his fingers dipping into her natural waist. Josh turned her to face him, dragging his palms up her arms. "Just admit that you want me to kiss you, Milai," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. He was probably still teasing, especially with his use of that horrible nickname. But something shivered between them, something heavy and real. Something way beyond the confines of this agreement they'd made for the week. "Okay," she said, but couldn't even force out any more words because Josh surged forward and captured her lips in a kiss. She made a small noise and clutched at his arms for support. In an instant, her hesitation dissolved and she was finally facing her base desires that she'd been ignoring for the past days, weeks, months, and years. All the quiet pining and suppressed admiration. They consumed her, leaving her blind and grappling for the wall of man in front of her. She kissed him like she wanted to. Like she'd dreamed of doing so many times late at night. Her tongue surged forward to find his, starting a sloppy, desperate dance. Josh cupped her face, and they stumbled sideways from the intensity of it all, knocking against the windows. Amelia snickered, and Josh glanced around making sure no one was watching. Nobody cared, but still, they needed 100% more privacy for what she was desperate to do with this man. "Let's go over here," Josh said, leading her by the hand to a small alcove with a fireplace. A curved love seat faced the roaring fire, and Josh sank onto the couch, tugging her down beside him. Before she could say a thing, Josh had her face in his hands, lips drawing more kisses out of her. She sank back into the couch, relishing the heat of the fire mixed with the heat of Josh's mouth. It stoked the fire inside her to dangerous levels. When they finally broke for air, Amelia's chest was heaving. "Jesus, Josh," she panted. He wet his bottom lip, his gaze still on her mouth. His hair was already tousled, shirt slightly askew. She had a fistful of his button-down in her right hand, just a breath away from ripping the thing off him. "Actually," he said, his voice husky, "I was wrong. Fuck this fireplace. Let's go back to our room." His implicit suggestion thrilled her, and she was nodding before she could think better of it. Because what was a better suggestion than that? Screw the consequences. Screw the fact that he was her boss and they were on a work vacation and every source of etiquette and conduct would tell her not to do this. Right now, after those kisses, she couldn't say no. Josh and Amelia ran toward the elevators, laughing like teenagers. In the elevator, he pinned her to the shiny wall and kissed her so hard her lips tingled and then started a path down her neck and chest. He barely had time to compose himself once the doors slid open on their floor. They edged past a family of 5, who stared at them, the parents glaring as if their kids were witnessing something they shouldn't. With a wave, Amelia laughed as Josh tugged her hand and they ran toward their suite. ####. After, Amelia laid in bed, her chest heaving as she fought to catch her breath. Josh surged forward and kissed her tenderly, far softer than she expected after their marathon session. He rolled off her, quickly taking the condom off and tossing it in the trash by the bed, before pulling her into his arms. "Hope you're a cuddler," he said into her ear, and she dissolved into giggles. He was the only man who could make her giggle. The only man who she could spend days with at a time and not tire of. The only man who she knew better than anyone else, and now, knew him just a little bit more. This was the afterglow. And damn, she'd been missing feeling like this. Time to enjoy it. Amelia snuggled up into his chest and let her eyes drift closed. Chapter 11. Josh. The next morning Josh couldn't stop smiling. They'd had an amazing night together and he'd be lying to himself if he didn't readily admit that he wanted more. Now, all they needed to do was seal the deal on Cedar Grove Hotel and this would be his best acquisition yet. And if he got the girl on top of that, it would be a Christmas to remember. With the holidays nearing, they had a light schedule, which pleased him. Amelia was still in bed, mumbling something about being kept up all night, so he sat comfortably in the sitting area answering emails when a Skype request came through. Looking to see who it was from, he grinned as he answered the call. "Elkin. Been a long time. How are you?" His old college roommate grinned back at him. "Good to see you, Denton. Busy as usual. Especially this time of year. Once the snow starts falling, Elk Lodge fills up. How's business? Your brother still have all his hair?" Josh snorted out a laugh. His older brother Mitch had always been the serious one growing up and their dad had started grooming him to take over the family business before he'd finished college, which had led Jonas Elkin to tease him about premature balding. "No cumbovers yet. But you didn't answer my question. How are you?" Jonas shrugged and Josh could see him look off to the side as though someone came in. "My grandmother has cancer." Josh stiffened. His grandparents had raised the brothers after their parents died and on the few occasions that he'd visited Elk Lodge, it was clear that Ellen Elkin was the matriarch of the family. "She's asked us all to come home for what might be her last Christmas, so we're doing what we can to make it special." Rubbing at the sudden ache in his chest. "Oh damn, I'm so sorry to hear that. Please give her my regards and I'll try to make it out after the new year for a visit." "Thanks, man." I bet she'd love that. She always had a soft spot for all the Dentons, including your cousin Chris. Josh could hear Amelia up and moving around in the bedroom. I'm guessing that's not why you called? Jonas shook his head. I understand you're looking at possibly acquiring Cedar Grove Hotel and Spa. I am. I have so many happy memories here. I really want to do something special with the place. In fact, I'm here now. Why? I'm assuming Colin Forrest is there as well? So that's where this was going. He is. My dad just lost out on a bid for a ski resort near your lodge. Should I assume he's the one who got it? He was. Wait, was? Turns out he wasn't completely honest with the owners about some of his plans for the resort, and they're trying to cancel the contract. He stands to lose a lot of money if the deal falls through, so he might push harder to acquire Cedar Grove. Josh knew his dad had wanted that resort. So does that mean they'll be entertaining bids again? Jonas chuckled. Nope. Grand's already spoken with them, and assuming they can get the contract cancelled, we're hoping to expand the resort. Of course you are. The bedroom door opened and Amelia came out wrapped in a robe with her hair in a towel, and Josh shifted his laptop so she wouldn't show up on camera. I'm starving after the night we had. Please tell me there's coffee. Josh grinned as Amelia answered her own question and watched as she poured herself a cup and added creamed and sugar. She looked adorable after her shower, and he'd already forgotten he was on a video call. Dude, I thought you were on a work trip. Oh shit, Josh, are you talking to someone? Amelia practically squeaked. He looked back to his friend. I am. Thanks for the heads up. I'll call you after the holidays to set up a time to come out to Colorado. Well, clearly I'm being dismissed, Jonas responded with a laugh. I have questions. I will expect answers. There will be scotch involved. Josh ended the call and closed his laptop. Turning back to Amelia, he could see the blush that she tried to hide behind her coffee cup. Are you off the call now? Setting his laptop aside, he held out his arms and she came to him. Taking her hand, he pulled her into his lap and wrapped his arms around her before burying his nose in her neck. She smelled like the floral shower gel the hotel supplied. Pressing a kiss to her neck, he told her, Jonas Elkin was my roommate in college. He was calling to warn me about Colin Forrest. Snuggling against him, she kissed his cheek. Is there going to be problems with him? Taking the coffee cup from her, he set it on the side table before tugging the towel off her head and tossing it to the floor. Running his fingers through her damp hair, he kissed her. Shifting so Amelia lay on the couch, he pulled the tie on her robe free and opened the robe to feast his eyes on the creamy expanse of skin, which had a beautiful rose flush. Thoughts of Colin Forrest and the hotel acquisition could wait. Amelia lay before him like some sort of divine offering, and he fully intended to enjoy himself. She stopped him before he could do anything. Josh? What about Colin? Nipping at her fingers, he moved so he was laying between her legs. Don't worry about him. I have it all under control. What you should worry about is the number of orgasms I intend to give you before I'll let you eat breakfast. Her answering moan was music to his ears. He could definitely get used to this. Chapter 12. Josh. Things had been cozy between them all day, probably in large part due to the earth-shattering orgasms they'd exchanged. But if Josh was being truthful, it was much more than that. Amelia was special, and spending time with her like this only cemented his desire for more. Much more. When Amelia got a text from her mom suggesting they both come to the house for dinner, Josh was more than ready for the family time. Let's just try to keep talk about wedding stuff to a minimum, Amelia was saying as she pulled on leggings. I hate lying, but even more with specific information. It'll be too easy for things to blow up in our faces. Deal. He couldn't keep his eyes off the curve of her ass as she checked herself out in the mirror. He gave a low whistle. Yeah? You like what you see? She teased, reaching for an oversized gray sweater. Once it was settled around her, perfectly slouchy but still revealing her curves, she worked on pulling her hair into a low bun. Gonna have to keep it in your pants for a few hours, stud. My parents won't take kindly to us fucking in the bathroom like teenagers. Did you fuck in your parents' bathroom when you were a teenager? He asked. She faltered. Well, no. How about this? I'll wait to fuck you when we get back to the room. Deal? She snorted, wobbling where she stood. Yeah. Deal. He pressed a kiss to her cheek as he breezed past, reaching for his coat. Yes, things were very cozy. And he liked it more than he could even describe. They called for a rideshare to take them to her parents' house, since they both planned on drinking there. It wasn't more than a 10-minute ride, though, just like practically all of Cedar Grove, everything was close by. Her parents had a secluded house out on a country road, flanked by woods on one side and an apple orchard on the other. When they got out of the car, Amelia's mother was already hanging out the front door, urging them in. Come on. Hurry up, lovebirds. Dinner's ready. Josh laughed while Amelia groaned. She's always hurrying me, she complained with a grin tugging at her lips. Finally, I get to see the family dynamics that shaped you into the woman you are today, Josh said. I wish it were more interesting than it really is, she remarked. Inside the house, a flurry of hugs and chatter greeted them. Rob and Rebecca were there, while Elise ran around underfoot. Amelia's mom immediately led Josh toward the platter of meats, where she carefully explained all of his options. The lamb is over here, she said in a low voice, lifting up some slices with a knife. But I have ham too, because I don't know how you feel about lamb. Whatever you made is fine by me, Josh said, fighting a grin. She's very attentive to people's meat options, Amelia said behind them. Once they shucked their coats, she squeezed Josh's side as she headed for the dining room table. 2 empty seats remained on the far side of the table, which Amelia's father indicated were for the lovebirds. The whole thing was so unlike his childhood experience, which had always involved nannies and someone running late. His parents ran empires, and while the love was there, the physical presence had sometimes been lacking with the exception of the time they spent at Cedar Grove. Amelia's house burst with warmth. With genuine interest and presence, and it was clear this was a regular occurrence. As the dinner began and everyone got to talking and eating, it became hard not to fall in love with everyone and everything. Red wine flowed as conversation easily shifted from sports teams to jokes to casual work talk. Once dessert was brought out, Amelia's father leaned in close to Josh. Hey, he said, in a conspiratorial whisper. Want to see some of Amelia's high school pictures? Amelia snorted. Dad, I can hear you. Her mother squealed, leaping up from the table. I'll get them right now. Rob rolled his eyes, but a grin tugged at his lips. I think they live for this moment. Yeah, and with this one, we barely get the chance to embarrass her, her dad complained jovially. Are you trying to say that I never have boyfriends? Amelia asked in mock injury. Yes, dear, he is, her mother confirmed, returning with a stack of books and what looked like a pile of photos on top. Now, Joshua, I have all the damning evidence anyone could ask for, so I hope you have a few hours available. I have days available for something like this. Weeks, even. Oh, but wait. I do have to ask. Are there any pics of Amelia playing the angel in the nativity play? Her mom smiled broadly. I do believe there's a few in the albums and I'm sure there's video if you want to see more. Amelia groaned. Pretty sure I feel a stomachache coming on. Maybe we should go. Dear, there's some antacid in the hall bathroom. Help yourself, her mom told her as she waved to the hallway. Her mom and dad cooed over each new photo unearthed from the stack, which was immediately passed around Amelia and into Josh's hands. Amelia watched with narrowed eyes, shaking her head at the worst ones. And here's our little meal in band, her mom said, handing over the individual band photo from sophomore year showing Amelia clutching her clarinet between her hands. Oh, wow, meal. Josh clucked his tongue, nodding. You were a band geek. Hey, she started. No. Don't worry. No shade here. He smiled at her. I was too. Her eyes widened. No way. What did you play? Flute. Rob snickered across the table. Are you serious? Amelia had the beginning of an incredulous smile on her face. That's so cute. I was first chair even. Josh sniffed, receiving another picture from her mom. Sure, playing flute had been a way to learn music, but as the buff, sports-inclined guy he also was in high school, it had been a new angle for him to get laid. He didn't need to go into all that over the dinner table, though. They all laughed over old pictures and memories until dessert was cleared and Josh felt the buzz through his body. When he looked over at Amelia, she had a heavy look in her eyes. One that told him it was time to go. You ready to head back? He asked in a low voice. She nodded, then reached to pull up the rideshare app. Let's do it. Hey, Mom and Dad, we're gonna head out. There's still some work waiting for us in the morning, so. A chorus of ahs erupted. Why don't you let me drive you? Her dad stood up, pushing the photos aside as he did. He headed toward the front hallway and slid into his shoes. We can call for a ride, Josh said. Nonsense. You're my children. I'm taking you. Josh grinned at Amelia and found her smiling into the heel of her palm. They got coats and shoes on, while her mom sighed that she didn't want to see them leave, insisting they should have stayed in the spare bedroom upstairs, and why didn't they have the wedding in the backyard already? By the time they'd hugged their way through the family and out the front door, Josh had Amelia's hand in his, more than ready to get back to the hotel. But he had to play the nice guy part a little bit longer. They climbed into the back seat of her dad's car, laughing as they did. Why do I feel like I'm back in high school? Amelia teased. Because I'm not allowed to touch or kiss you right now, he whispered into her ear. That prompted more laughter, and a quizzical look from her dad through the rearview mirror. I'd say hands off my daughter, but it's too late for that, isn't it? He mused, blinker ticking as he pulled out onto the road. Josh kept his grip on Amelia's hand the entire drive back to the hotel, keeping the conversation fun and lighthearted, even though desire streaked through him. Despite last night and this morning, he was hungry for her, again. He had no idea how things would be once they left Cedar Grove, but he would enjoy their time together now and tackle that potential hurdle later. By the time they'd reached the hotel, Josh was half-hard and ready to bolt to their room. He'd simply been holding Amelia's hand, proving to himself even more that she'd turned him into a horny teen somewhere over the course of last night. After a friendly goodbye and lots of waving, Amelia's dad finally pulled away. He cinched his arms around her waist, bringing her jolting against him. Upstairs, he asked. Immediately. Chapter 13. Josh. They ran, holding hands, into the Cedar Grove Hotel and headed for the elevators. Josh pushed the up button several times, even though it wouldn't help. Once the doors opened, they tumbled inside, tucking themselves into the corner least visible from the outside. Kisses erupted, but this time they were deeper. More passionate. Josh didn't even notice when the elevator doors opened behind him. It took another guest at the hotel clearing their throat before he could tear himself away from Amelia. Excuse us, he said, tugging at Amelia's hand to get off the elevator. She rolled her lips inward, and a laugh burst out of her once they'd walked far enough away. Guess we were pretty distracted, huh? It took 3 tries for him to swipe the keycard, but once the door swung open, the two of them stumbled in. Josh cupped her face in his hands, finally kissing her like he wanted now that they were in the privacy of their own suite. Long, intentional kisses. Far deeper than prying eyes would allow. Kisses so deep that they stole the breath from him. Made his vision go spotty. When they finally broke apart, Amelia took a big gulp of air. Her lips were puffy. Kiss-bitten. It just made him hungry for more. We had sex all night last night and this morning, she breathed, her eyes wild, but I still feel like I haven't gotten enough. He grunted, guiding her backward into the bedroom. When she stumbled, he swept her up into his arms. She giggled, kicking her legs while she wrapped her arms around his neck. Let's never leave this room, he suggested after he'd tossed her on the bed and covered her body with his own. I'm game. You can do your job from Cedar Grove, right? Absolutely. He dragged his lips over hers, then tugged at her bottom lip with his teeth. And I can probably work in my new position from this suite. She pushed her tongue into his mouth. He grunted again, settling between her thighs. Desperate to get their clothes off already. All these clothes? Need to come off. He pulled away from her, even though every cell of his body protested the decision. It was necessary for forward movement. To get back to that sweet heat that had held him captive since yesterday. That might keep him captive for days or weeks to come. Her touch revved him up. Every little thing she did was a turn on. All the way down to simply holding his hand. He didn't know what that meant yet. Didn't know if he should pay attention to it or ignore it. For now, all that mattered was getting more of her. While he still could. After the evening spent bathing in the warmth of her family, a new side to Amelia was making him fall even harder for her. She wasn't simply his sexy, smart assistant that he'd been forcibly overlooking for the past 2 years. In such a short time, she'd come to mean more to him than anyone else. Hashtag. After, Josh rolled to face her and tugged her into his arms, needing the weight of her against him. They lay like that, breathing heavily and intertwined, for a long time. Saying nothing. Just soaking in the post-orgasm bliss. Finally, Amelia shifted in his arms, turning to face him. "Wanna order room service?" Josh laughed, swiping his thumb across her jawline. "What do you want?" "Cake. We had dessert at your parents' house. But I need cake after what just happened." Josh laughed, rolling off the bed. He went to the bedside phone, and her eyes sparkled as she watched him. "Wow. I didn't mean you had to call for cake. But I like the fact that there was no question." He smiled, picking up the receiver to call down to the desk. He ordered 2 slices of chocolate cake, fresh berries, and a bottle of wine. Just in case. "I like this," she said once he climbed back onto the bed and pulled her into his arms. "Second dessert. It's almost Christmas, anyway, so why not indulge ourselves?" He murmured his agreement, his lips trailing kisses down her neck. "We need to replace the calories," Josh affirmed. "But it serves another purpose too. Though you might not have realized it, the chocolate cake qualifies as reconnaissance." "Does it?" He nodded, squeezing a handful of her ass. "Oh yeah. You see, I'm big on the cake that's served in our existing hotels. But maybe their cake is better. We need to find out." Amelia laughed, propping up on an elbow to look up at him. "Why the big deal about cake?" A flicker of doubt flashed through him. He didn't normally get too deep about his family life with anyone, but with Amelia, it seemed safe to go there. "Just one of the ways I try to honor my mother's memory. She made the best chocolate cake. Like, out of this world." And, well, the clamp of emotion arrived. But after so many years without her, the grief didn't hold him hostage anymore. He could talk about her now. "It's how I try to keep her memory around." Amelia trailed a finger along his collarbone, her brows drawn. "That's really sweet. I'm glad to know that, actually." "Yeah? Yeah. I thought maybe you were obsessed with cake." She grinned, and he tugged her by the hip, bringing her closer to him. "Maybe I am. But for all the right reasons." Amelia snuggled up against him. "If I had to do something in my mother's honor for my epic chain of hotels, well, I think she'd like it best if I served potato salad nonstop." Josh laughed. "I missed her potato salad obsession over dinner. It's only a matter of time before she reveals it. Trust me. It was one of the reasons I had to move to New York." Josh laughed. "The biggest reason, right?" "Escaping potato salad for every meal was the primary reason. Building my career was a close second." Her words made his smile fall a little. The career that had led her to him, and stalled out in his office. "And what direction do you want your career to go?" She narrowed her eyes as she thought. "The top. I don't know exactly what position, but something like what you do. That's my dream." His smile fell even further, but not because he disliked what she said. Not exactly. He would have kept her as his assistant for the rest of his life if she hadn't negotiated the promotion as part of this deal. He'd never fully considered the fact that this position might be holding her back, or just a mere stepping stone along the path of her career. "You'll get there," he said, and then squeezed her ass cheek. She giggled. "Is that the ass squeeze of support?" "Exactly." They laughed, just as a knock sounded at the door. The way her eyes lit up sent a hot streak through him. He was having too much fun with her. Enjoying this a little bit too much. But he needed to remember that however fun it was, this union of theirs was strictly business. Once the new year hit, she'd be moving along. Gone. Unless there was a chance that this thing between them could become something more. Something real. Chapter 14. Amelia. At brunch the next morning, Amelia was practically floating on air. They held hands and snickered at inside jokes the whole way to the lobby. There was no acting between them anymore. This glow? 100% real, after their 2 sizzling nights in their couple's suite. The resort restaurant had a small line at the host's stand when they arrived just before 11 a.m. Amelia leaned into Josh after he wrapped his arm around her. Sure, they could claim they were pretending. Putting on a show for curious eyes. But she wanted to be doing this. Nothing about their laughter or conversation was forced or fabricated. "Can you believe Christmas is next week?" Amelia asked as they sat near some potted ferns, waiting for the hostess to call their name. "It still feels so far away." "But it's terrifyingly close," Josh said, straightening slightly. "Let's just hope this deal is done by Christmas. I want a contract in the works before the new year." "I think you'll get your answer by then." Amelia smiled up at him, getting lost in the icy blue of his eyes. "I think it's already in the bag." A grin tugged at his lips as he gazed down at her. "Thanks for believing in me." She returned the smile and then pushed up on her tiptoes to kiss him. Nope, this was definitely not acting. But if it wasn't acting, then what was it? It wasn't like they were dating now. Except, maybe they could start. The whole thing was so confusing, she didn't even know where to begin. She figured she'd ignore it a little bit longer. Ride the wave until she was forced to make sense of this. That seemed like the safest bet. Loud voices snagged her attention a moment later. Laughter followed, and then Stan Lewis strolled into view. Followed by Colin Forrest and his family. "No, seriously, I'd love to talk more about it," Colin was saying. Josh stiffened. He only watched them for a moment before something slid over his face like a mask. Steel determination. Focus. She'd watched Josh at work long enough to know that he'd just clicked into competitive business mode. "Stan. Great to see you again." Josh made his presence known, striding over to offer his hand. He sent a polite greeting to Colin, and Amelia nibbled on her lip as she watched. She was sure that Josh was a shoo-in. But still, Colin made her nervous. She knew enough about him and his business to know that he was a real threat. Which was why Josh was going on the offensive. Why he was standing over there jangling change in his pockets, looking back at her with a bright, but plastic, smile. "Isn't that right, honey?" Josh asked her. She blinked, realizing suddenly she'd missed a good portion of their conversation. "I'm sorry, what?" "I said we'd just been talking about wanting to speak with Stan again. You should all come sit with us, it'll make brunch even better." Amelia's forearms prickled, recognizing this for what it was, a power move. She nodded, smiling. "Yes, that's perfect. That way we can all catch up." Josh made a point of looking around. "Colin, where's your wife and kids? They aren't interested in brunch?" A brief emotion passed over Colin's face before he smiled. "Afraid not. The youngest woke with a tummy ache this morning and my wife thought it would be best to order room service and stay in." "Oh, that's terrible. You didn't want to stay to help?" Josh's question sounded innocent, but Amelia knew better. Colin coughed out a laugh. "Would I be considered a bad parent if I admit that I was happy she shooed me out of the room?" Josh gave a slight shrug. I think only you can answer that. I'll be right back. He went to the hostess to amend their reservation, and when he came back, she could see the change in him. He'd transformed in front of her, from the laid-back lover she'd met over the past 2 nights to this bristly, hard-edged businessman. To be fair, she'd seen this side of Josh plenty. But it had never been in comparison to the new side of him. The one that she wanted more and more of. Their larger group was seated quickly near a long row of windows overlooking the trees lining the southern edge of the property. Josh made sure to sit across from Stan. Amelia faced Stan's wife Betty, and to her right, Colin. You know, I've been hearing a lot about you, Colin said to her once drink orders were taken. Everyone had settled into pleasantries. Seems you're a Cedar Grove poster child for success. Amelia smiled, but panic seared through her. What could he have possibly heard? Maybe she'd underestimated how small Cedar Grove really was. Is that so? The whole town is proud of how far you've gone, Stan said. All the way to New York City, working with the esteemed Denton hotels. Amelia glanced over in time to see Colin's smile tighten. And I'll never forget where it all began, Amelia said, squeezing Josh's knee under the table as a quiet plea for help. In beautiful Cedar Grove. Stan smiled wistfully. Colin amped up his smile and leaned in closer. You know, Denton hotels might be great, but have you ever considered working with the Forrest family? Amelia blinked, turning to him slowly. She couldn't have heard him right. I'm sorry. The air cinched tight around Josh. She could practically feel the prickles forming on his forearms. With all this talk about how far you've gone, you seem like a true rising star. I've been on the lookout for a new location scout. If Denton isn't careful, I might have to steal you away. Colin laughed in a way that clearly signaled the joke aspect. But was he really kidding? Josh's own hollow laughter arrived next. I don't blame you wanting to steal her away. Amelia is extremely talented. I'd happily have her as my assistant forever. Why do you think we're getting married? The men at the table erupted in laughter. Amelia tried to force herself to join them, but the joke remained a sinking stone in her gut as the conversation moved on to other topics. Josh must have sensed her glowering, because he kept squeezing her knee and smiling over at her. But the damage was done. She faced the truth now. Josh was a success-obsessed man who would say and do anything to close a deal. She'd seen it over the years as he fought to win acquisitions. She'd known it the second he asked her to pose as his fiancée. And now, this brunch reminded her how far he was willing to go. She supposed it wouldn't have mattered as much if she hadn't started sleeping with him. If she hadn't granted access to that side of her that had been quietly infatuated with him since day one. But she'd allowed herself to fall for him, to get a little lost inside this fantasy of being with him. But this potent reminder prompted more questions within her. Josh knew how to turn on the charm and seal deals. Had he been doing that with her in the bedroom too? Maybe it was all just an act, maybe it always was. A 24/7 attempt to wheel and deal to get what he wanted. Amelia hardly even noticed when the food came, and she floated along in the conversation nodding and smiling at the right times. She couldn't stop thinking about whether Josh truly cared about her career goals, or only his. Whether he only saw her as the perfect assistant and not a person with her own life and trajectory. I'll be right back, she said once she'd finished her plate of eggs and bacon. She offered a small smile to the table and set her napkin aside, then hurried off to the bathroom. She needed to be alone in the cool quiet to get her head on straight. She was losing herself out there, sinking deep into the quicksand of feelings and romance, when this thing was only ever supposed to be a work trip. Romance wasn't supposed to be part of it. What Josh thought about her future or her as a person shouldn't matter. She needed to remember that too. She breezed out of the bathroom, determined to keep her chin up. No more getting lost in the fantasy of Josh. Sure, it stung that her years-long unrequited lust for him wouldn't turn into something grander and better, but that was how life worked. She didn't have time for a relationship, and she knew it. She should be thanking him for not being the man of her dreams. When she rounded the corner into the wide hallway leading back to the restaurant, she nearly crashed into Colin. Amelia, There you are. He had a used car salesman-style smile on his face. I wanted to talk to you a bit more about the job opportunity. She gaped at him. Are you serious? Very. I wasn't kidding when I said that I was impressed by what I know about you. I saw your profile on LinkedIn, looking for just the type of job I'm offering. I've done my research on you. And I'm prepared to offer you more than what you'd be making at Denton. She could only blink in response. She'd forgotten about the LinkedIn searching addition she'd made to her profile. It had happened one night last month on a weekend when she'd been tipsy and feeling stuck. She hadn't even told Josh about it, and it was probably why Colin was approaching her now. He pressed his business card into her hand. We're based in Chicago, but we're looking to expand into New York and New England. I'd love someone with your expertise in the industry on our team. Promise me you'll think about it? Amelia was nodding before she could even think better of it. It also seemed like the easiest way to get out of the situation. But once Colin headed back to the restaurant and she trailed behind a moment later, incredulity and shock began to swirl in equal measure. What a bold move. Trying to scout your competition's fiancé? It almost seemed like it could be illegal. Except it wasn't. And maybe Colin could sense they weren't a real couple. Or could sense that something was off between them. Before she got back to the table, her phone pinged with a text message. It was Rob. Got time for coffee? She bit her lip. Josh wouldn't mind if she took some time away. When? 2 hours. You know where. See you then. She swept back to the table with renewed vigor. She was more than ready to put some space between her and Josh. To let the confusing dregs of this situation settle and form something even slightly recognizable. Chapter 15. Amelia. Thank God for coffee dates. Amelia sighed as she hugged Rob inside the cozy coffee shop in downtown Cedar Grove. She'd often spent hours holed up here, nursing chai lattes and barreling through detective novels as a young girl. The place had barely changed through the years, still featuring the same homey dark wood accents and the bearskin rugs. They did have a new wine bar that looked like it was doing well. A fireplace crackled in the corner and they sank into overstuffed armchairs near the fire. I'd been wanting to catch up, the two of us, Rob said, raking a hand through his short, blonde hair. It's been so long since we've been able to do this. And it'll be even harder once the next little nugget gets here. She winked at him from over her chai. Part of the homage to her younger self. You ever think about giving them some cousins? She laughed, almost spilling her tea. No. Sorry. I don't think so. I don't know. Josh seems like a family man. She started to snort, but then she remembered the ruse. The blatant lie she was expected to uphold with her closest family members and loved ones. The one she'd agreed to. Yeah. He is. I don't know. We haven't decided yet. Rob looked down at the mug of coffee in his hands. I really like Josh. I think you found a good one. She smiled wanly. Yeah? He's at your level. My level? Rob shrugged. You know what I mean. Her brother had never been excellent at conveying himself. Your type of success level. We always knew you were gonna bust out of here and do something spectacular. He's at the top, too. Like you. Ah. She reached over to swat his knee. Brother. Thank you. His words did warm her, even though the marriage would never happen. It was nice that he saw her as reaching heights like Josh. She planned to go that high, if not higher. And I can tell what a family-oriented person he is. Even if you don't want kids and all that. He's already looking out for our family, you know? She sipped slowly at the chai. How so? Well, he offered me a job already. Heat flooded her limbs. This was news to her. What? Well, he said that if the resort deal goes through, he'd want me on the team to do the renovation work. If he wins the bid, you know? Amelia smiled, but doubts rang through her. That could be a lot of hot air. And maybe it was just Josh's ploy to win over her family, too. Besides, what was he thinking, offering serious employment to her brother when, after the resort construction began, they wouldn't even be an item anymore? It reeked of poor planning at best and transparent manipulation at worst. "He's a great guy," Amelia said, trying to sound chipper. "And I'm sure it'll be great working for him." She steered the conversation to other things then: the new baby, how her niece was doing, what Rebecca was planning in terms of going back to work once the next baby arrived, and an hour melted away lost in conversation. She would have stayed there all afternoon if her brother hadn't needed to get back to the house. As Amelia headed for the hotel, she couldn't get the sick knot to unfurl in her gut. Something about Josh just didn't sit right anymore. She should be glad that she only had days left with him. Soon, she'd get her promotion and move into a new chapter in life. So why didn't she feel more excited about it? Back at the hotel room, Josh was bent over his laptop when she pushed inside. He immediately popped to his feet to greet her. "There you are." He headed her way, pulling her into a hug. "Is it weird that I missed you?" She couldn't relax in his arms. When he pulled away, concern creased his face. "Is everything okay?" Amelia could only stare at him, unsure how to form the words that begged to be spoken. She had no right to feel the way she did. She was making a mountain out of a molehill. She and Josh were nothing. So why did it still sting? "Why did you offer my brother a job doing the renovation work?" Josh's mouth parted, like that had been the last thing he'd expected to hear. Because your brother works in construction and it makes sense?" She sighed, walking past him. "Yeah, well, you did that without even talking to me first. And don't you think shit is gonna get weird once our fake engagement ends?" Josh followed her into the bedroom where she set down her purse and pulled off her earrings. "Rob seems like a great guy. I was trying to be nice, helpful. He has another baby on the way. How is a work opportunity a bad idea?" "It's not," she said, her voice clipped. "Besides, it's the type of thing a brother-in-law would do." "Yeah, except they're my family, not yours." She turned to him, hands on her hips. "You shouldn't have done that without asking me first." Josh's brows knit together. "I can see that I overstepped." He paused, stepping closer. "Is there something else bothering you? You seem..." "Watch what you say to me," Amelia warned. "Different." "I don't know. What's up?" She huffed, turning back toward the bed. Colin's offer still weighed heavily on her, and she hadn't decided whether it was a good idea to tell Josh. But the truth bubbled below the surface. Like it was planning an eruption, no matter what she decided. "Colin made me an offer today," she said quietly, unable to look him in the eye. "He wants to hire me to be a location scout for their East Coast expansion." Josh stepped closer, touching the side of her arm. "And you said no, right?" She backed up, finally daring to meet his eyes. "I agreed to think about it." Josh's blue gaze hardened into ice. "You what?" I was so shocked. When he asked me to think about it, I just nodded. I couldn't even believe he had the balls to ask me that. Josh scoffed, raking a hand through his hair. "Wow. That's rich. What do you want, Amelia? More money? I'm already paying you a fucking arm and a leg on this trip and giving you a promotion. Do you want me to sign over my stocks too? What is it?" Betrayal shone through his words, and for a moment, Amelia could only watch him, shell-shocked. But she remembered then that she wasn't the one in the wrong. She had simply been approached. She hadn't accepted. Not like Josh would really care. He only saw her as the perfect assistant, anyway. "Yeah. Keep it coming. I noticed you're really good at giving people whatever the fuck they want," she spat. She turned, storming to the bathroom. Before she shut the door, she leaned out and added, "You'll buy off anyone as long as it gets you what you want." She locked the bathroom door behind her and turned the water on before he could come knocking or get in another word. She needed to cool off. She needed to think. She needed to get her head straight so she could survive the rest of this trip. Chapter 16. Josh. The next day dragged on, frostier than ever, which had nothing to do with the weather. Amelia was distant with him, only responding to work-related issues, which annoyed Josh. He couldn't stand the growing divide between them. He could fix this, if only she'd let him. And he wanted to fix it. Because she mattered to him. Her opinion of him mattered. And he felt like she had it all wrong, but she had steadfastly refused to talk about their argument. That evening, they had caroling and a bonfire scheduled. It was one of the hotel's biggest holiday events, after the tree lighting, and the grounds were packed with carolers and spectators. Josh and Amelia wove through the crowd, winding down the brick path toward the grove of aspen trees where the singing would commence. Everything and everyone around him was festive and spirited. Everyone except the woman on his arm. Colin sauntered up to them, looking as smarmy as ever. Tension tightened Josh's muscles, and he tightened his grip on Amelia's hand. Josh. Amelia. Great to see you again. He grinned wide at the both of them, but his gaze zeroed in on Amelia. Have you given any more thought to my proposal? Josh recoiled slightly. The nerve of this guy. In front of him, no less. You're very nice to check in, but I'm still thinking about it, Amelia said, laying on the sweetness. After Colin wandered off, Josh led her off to the side. Are you serious right now? What? She snapped, yanking her hand out of his. Colin actually seems to value me, unlike you. Why shouldn't I think about his offer? Josh narrowed his eyes. Oh, cut the crap. I value you more than he does. Do you though? He's known me 2 days and wants to pay me more than you do. I told you. Money is no issue. You're right, she hissed. It's not. It's just everything else that's the issue. Josh's nostrils flared. Don't convince yourself that Colin is some noble businessman who wants to offer you a job because he's some sort of super fan. He's not. He's making a power play. I've seen this sort of thing before. Whatever. Even if I'm a pawn in the game, he's still willing to recognize my worth. Josh scoffed, real anger scorching through him. Like I don't? Amelia, you've been indispensable to me for 2 years now. I've never done anything but laud you. But you would only agree to a promotion as a last-ditch effort to make a deal. Her words thudded between them, landing harder than a punch. He clenched his jaw. He couldn't fight that. Because she was right, even though it wasn't the whole story. At his silence, she continued. You only care about winning. I hesitate to imagine what might have happened if this hotel hadn't gone up for sale. Would I still be stuck working for you? What if a position opened up that I was perfect for? Would you allow me to take it or find some reason to force me to stay? Amelia, don't be like this, Josh said quietly, trying to reel the conversation back into manageable territory. There was more on the line here than her work at Denton hotels. This was about them, too, in some obscure way. About this amorphous future that every cell of his body craved with her without knowing how to get there. You act like you would have languished for your entire life in my office. I haven't been holding you back. And don't delude yourself into thinking that I am. Amelia clamped her mouth shut and looked away, crossing her arms over her chest. Her foot tapped for a few moments before suddenly she said, You know what? I'm not feeling very well. I think I'm going to head back to the suite. She brushed past him before he could say anything else. He watched her storm off, half of him determined to follow her and finish this conversation, once and for all. But he needed to maintain his presence here. To run into Stan, to defend himself against any more of Colin's advances. And besides, maybe Amelia was right. He did care about winning. It had always been the priority. But had he taken it too far? Thoughts and doubts swirled inside him as he drifted through the caroling presentation. He clapped when everyone else did, tried to smile when others caught his eye. But without Amelia at his side, without her heat sinking into him or the soft sounds of her jokes in his ear, this festive event felt like just one more chore. There was one thing for certain. He wanted Amelia in his life. Not only in a professional context, within arm's reach at the office. He wanted her at his side. His partner. His everything. He needed to figure out a way to right the scales. Josh dipped out of the sweet harmonies of the carolers early so that he could wander inside the hotel. Lost in thought and combing through options. Every path led him back to Amelia. He'd been attracted to her since the day he met her. And as they worked together, his admiration and respect bloomed even more. This sexual dimension between them was the final layer in the cake that looked suspiciously like a long-term relationship, which he believed they could create. And he wanted to. He wanted to give it a shot with Amelia, because everything was better with her at his side. In business and in love. And the longer he wandered, the more he realized that there was only one path forward. If he wanted to convince her that he was being real with her, then he needed to be real with everyone. It was time to fess up. To Stan himself. Chapter 17. Josh. After a restless night sleeping on the farthest reaches of the bed, Josh woke up with renewed vigor the following morning. Christmas Eve was 3 days away, which meant that Amelia would be breaking away today or the next day to begin her previously planned Christmas vacation with her family. He didn't have much time left, with her, or to convince the Lewises. Which meant he had to act now. "What's on deck today?" Amelia asked after she'd taken her shower and finished her makeup. She'd stopped changing in front of him, stopped sleeping naked. There were lots of drawbacks to their recent freeze, and one of the worst ones was not being able to spoon her naked body at night. They'd only been intimate for a couple of days, and already he felt like he'd wither if he didn't get her every day for the rest of his life. "Well, I scheduled a last-minute meeting with Stan," Josh said tentatively, taking out his phone to check the message thread. He crossed his ankle over his knee, leaning back in the armchair in the bedroom. Stan was on board but hadn't confirmed the time yet. "You should be there." He paused, weighing his words before he admitted his plan. "I'm going to tell him that we're not engaged and that this was all a ruse to get him to pick me." Amelia blinked, turning to face him. Her face was a neutral mask, one he was desperate to break through. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "I don't want to win this hotel on a lie." He cleared his throat, leaning forward to rest his elbows on his knees. "I don't want to lose you on a lie either." Amelia's throat bobbed, and she turned toward the closet to slip her feet into her black heels. "So what's your plan?" "I'll be honest with him. I don't care if I lose the deal because of it. I'll tell your parents the same, if you want me to. Because if he picks me, I don't want the win to be stained by the fact that it was dishonest." Amelia was quiet for so long that he worried she hadn't heard him. But that was impossible. There was so much more he wanted to add, too. About them. About a future. But he had to choose his words carefully. His phone buzzed then. Stan had sent a text that simply said, "Now?" "He's ready. We should go down there." He sighed and stood, recognizing the nervous flutters. He could be flushing all this hard work down the drain. Good thing his father wasn't here to watch this. But Amelia's opinion of him meant more than his dad's disappointment. Because this thing between them promised to be something real, if only he could get the chance to cultivate it. "And don't worry about our arrangement," Josh said, heading for the door. Amelia trailed close behind, the floral notes of her perfume hitting him in a nostalgic wave. She'd be gone from his life for good after the new year, unless he could convince her to take a chance on this. "I plan to pay you like we agreed. Nothing about that changes." "I wasn't worried it would." Amelia sniffed, clutching a small handbag against her thighs as they waited for the elevator. Josh drank her in, the oversized white sweater paired with shiny black leggings. Her work boot heels. The bright lipstick that always made him crave a kiss from that juicy pout. "But I appreciate that." "Amelia, haven't you felt?" Josh paused when the doors slid open. They stepped inside and he jabbed his finger at the ground floor button. "There's something between us." She lifted a palm to stop him. "Let's talk about it after, okay? Let's let one thing go down in flames before you light something else on fire." He clenched and unclenched his jaw, stuffing his hands in his pockets. He wanted to scoop her up in his arms and kiss away the confusion of the past few days. But she was right. One thing at a time. And the next thing on his list was winning over Amelia. They started a somber walk to Stan's office once the elevator hit the ground floor. He ushered them inside, gesturing to 2 open chairs facing his wide wooden desk. The bay windows overlooked a secret corner of the property. A side door led out to a little, snow-covered garden, and Josh was suddenly desperate to see what that alcove might look like in the spring. Could already imagine the rhododendron in bloom and the wisteria lining the brick path. And beyond the hidden garden, he could see in his mind's eye the paths he used to walk with his mother. The rolling hills that had formed a part of his childhood memories and now even his adult memories, with Amelia at his side. He wanted this property, for reasons that went way beyond just winning. It had been that way from the beginning, but if anything, Amelia's descent had caused him to look harder at why. She'd formed a new horizon of meaning for him. One that he wasn't eager to let go of. "Stan, I'm sorry for the abrupt meeting, but we need to talk." Josh eased into his seat as did Amelia. "Is everything okay?" Stan asked, lifting a brow. Josh licked his lips, trying to recall the monologue he'd been practicing in the suite. "I haven't been completely honest with you. Owning this resort is a dream of mine, but in my quest to, for lack of a better word, woo you, I asked my assistant Amelia to pretend to be my fiancée." Stan's eyes slowly narrowed as Josh spoke, which sent his stomach plummeting to his toes. "I thought that if I came as a family man, you might be more inclined to choose me. Amelia is every bit as amazing and accomplished as you think she is, and you should know that this was my idea. I asked her to be a part of my ruse. And I wouldn't feel good knowing that you chose me based on a lie." Stan's gaze shifted to Amelia, who only grimaced in response. Josh pushed ahead. "As I've told you before, my interest in this hotel is sparked by the amazing memories I have of being here with my mother. With my family. That much was true. But my mother raised me better than to accept an ill-gotten gain, so I had to come clean with you. I'm sorry for misleading you, and I understand if you decide to go with Colin." The air went out of him, and he collapsed back into the chair, bracing himself for whatever came next. Stan blinked, looking between the two of them. His face was an impassive mask, until suddenly he barked out a sharp laugh. "Well, that was the last thing I was expecting to hear today." Josh pushed 2 fingers back and forth over his hairline, his entire body on pins and needles waiting for more from Stan. "Honestly, what can I say?" Stan leaned back in his own chair and steepled his fingers. A strange smile curled at his lips. "I'm quite impressed that you decided to come clean with me." "It's the right thing to do," Josh said, clearing his throat. "I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't." "You know, I was planning to find you later today anyway," Stan said. "To let you know that I'd finally made my decision. And that I wanted Denton Hotels to be the new owner." Josh's stomach cinched, awaiting the final blow. "But now I'm even more certain of my decision," Stan went on. "Admitting something like this takes a level of honesty and reflection that isn't often seen in today's world." Stan's smile curled even larger. "In fact, you've made me even more certain in my decision to choose Denton Hotels." Josh's eyes widened. This couldn't be real. With such a sordid confession, he'd been 100% ready to accept the defeat he knew was coming. He hadn't even planned for a response like this. Hadn't even thought it possible. "Are you sure?" Josh couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "Oh, yes. Believe me, there are plenty of others I could pick for the new ownership. But none fully understand the vision of this place. Nobody else has the history with it. I have my own qualms about Forrest family's offer, and to be honest, given your recent confession, I have my doubts about Colin's family." Josh waved his hands to stop Stan. "I can say with certainty that really is his wife and kids, but this is the first time I've ever seen them all together. And right there, young man, you've just proved my point that you're the best man for the job, Josh. Even if you got a little caught up along the way." Josh surged to his feet to offer his hand. Relief and excitement vibrated through him, and he wanted to kiss the man's feet. Stan stood as well to shake his hand, and Josh thanked him no less than 5 times as he wrapped up the meeting. Amelia looked just as surprised and happy as he felt, and once they were back in the lobby, he turned to her with wide eyes. "I can't believe that happened." She grinned at him. "I'm glad it did. Look at you, Mr. Cedar Grove hotel owner." He pulled her into a hug, and this time she didn't resist. All the frostiness between them over the past few days had thankfully melted. For now. But he needed to make sure it stayed that way. "Let's go celebrate," Josh blurted. Her smile fell slightly. "Where?" "The bar. Right now. They have an 18-year-old Macallan on the menu. It's my tradition." He grabbed her hand and brought her knuckles to his lips. "And besides, the vacation has officially begun." This win was his in to Amelia again. And he wasn't going to let it slip by. Chapter 18. 2 glasses into their celebrations, and Amelia's body was buzzing with more than alcohol. It was only noon, and she'd hit her limit for so early in the day. But even the minimal amount of alcohol had eroded the happiness of Stan's decision, leading her right back into the cyclone of doubts that had been plaguing her over the past few days. She admired Josh's confession. She really did. But she was hesitant to accept it at face value. Because what if this was another power play? What if this was Josh's attempt to make sure he didn't lose her to the competition? Josh sighed, slapping his palms against the wooden bar top. "God, it feels good to be alive." She smirked. "Says the most victorious man in the world." "Yeah, but I don't quite have it all." Josh pushed his empty glass away. "Can we talk about us now?" Her stomach shrank. She was hesitant to go there, but she didn't know why. Having these doubts about Josh felt like a betrayal to the man she'd secretly been in love with for the past 2 years. Like the real Josh wasn't as perfect as the version she'd created in her head. She didn't fully believe he was manipulating their time together. But she couldn't be certain. "Go for it," she said, also pushing her glass away. At least the scotch would lubricate things slightly. It had taken the edge off her hesitation. It was just them in the bar and the bartender at the far end washing glasses. This was as good a time as any to dive into this sticky situation. He turned to her on the bar stool, opening up his legs. He jerked her stool toward him, the legs scraping against the floor. She laughed a little, and his hands encircled her waist. "This," he said in a low voice, his eyes hooded. "I want this. With you." "You want me half drunk in a bar 3 days before Christmas," she teased, only because she didn't know how else to move forward. His jaw flexed. "Don't play coy. We've got chemistry, MacTaggart, and I know you feel it too. I fucked up, but I want to make things right. Amelia, I want to be with you." His words were a balm to the slashes he'd caused inside her. And God, she wanted to fall headfirst into his words. Into his promises. Into this dreamy future that could be theirs if only she could shake her doubts. "I could want that too," she said carefully, trying to walk that fine line between shitting all over his idea and being honest with herself. "I don't want to play games anymore. I've learned a lot about you during this trip, Josh." She laughed. "More than I expected, I'll be honest." Josh's gaze swept over her body, his hands coming to rest on her hips. And with his heat pouring into her, the reassuring firmness of his touch, the scent of him that filled her and sent her into a spiral, it was hard to want to pull away. But these doubts were real. And she needed to be certain that she was making the right choice with Josh. That she wasn't being used as a pawn in his game. "I'm not playing games," he insisted quietly. "Honestly?" She licked her lips, willing herself to say the words. "I need some time." He deflated a little. "How much?" "I'm going to my parents' house like I planned," she said deliberately, allowing time for the plan to form in her head as she spoke. "And you planned on heading home to celebrate Christmas with your own family. So I think we should spend the holidays apart." His jaw flexed again. "Amelia." "I need some time by myself," she said, running her thumb over the bone in his wrist. The heat she felt even there made her eyelids flutter. God, she wanted endless nights with this man. She wanted all the happiness and bliss she'd felt earlier in the week. But she wanted it only if it was real. You make it hard for me to think. Because I see you, and I want you. I'm not going to lie. What you're asking for is big. It'll change both our lives. Being in a relationship. And she trailed off. I want to be sure. Josh surged forward, cupping her face before snagging her lips in a passionate kiss. She whimpered, receiving his lips hungrily. After days without a kiss from him, without feeling his touch, she was starved for him. Heat stormed her as they kissed again and again, only breaking when she needed to take a gulp of air. Jesus, she muttered. Josh pressed his forehead against hers. Milai, he started, which made her laugh. She swatted his shoulder. That horrible nickname needs to die, she warned. Fine, he said, brushing his nose against hers. But only if you give me a chance. Her stomach tightened, a signal she needed to retreat. I think I'm going to go get my stuff packed and head to my parents' house. Shit. We came in my car. Josh wet his bottom lip and watched her for a moment before nodding. Okay. Yeah. Of course. And don't worry about it. I'll arrange for a car. She lingered there, facing him on the stool, hesitant to leave the intimate cocoon they'd created at the bar. But she steeled herself and scooted away. I'm not going with you because I'll just make sure you don't leave, Josh said, squeezing her hand. It was thoughtful and respectful in a way, which made her smile. Because if she didn't leave now, she might never. Leaning toward him, she lightly brushed her lips across his before jumping off the stool and heading back to their suite without another word. ####. Amelia made quick work of packing her things, stopping no less than 4 times to sit on the bed and reconsider her decision. But this was for the best. Because she needed to clear her head. Because she needed to be sure. When she arrived at her parents' house that afternoon, both her parents were shocked that she'd come without Josh. In fact, when she sat them down at the table to reveal the truth, they insisted they wait for Josh before she told them her big news. No, Mom, Amelia said, sighing. The big news has to do with why Josh isn't here. What's going on? Her dad asked. Did he have to go back to New York City? Amelia worked her jaw back and forth as she stared at the familiar wood grain of the dining room table. I'm not sure actually. He has separate plans for Christmas. Her mom frowned, and regret flashed through Amelia. I thought he was going to be spending it here with us. No. Actually, that was never the plan. She tapped her thumbs against the dining room table. What a stupid position she was in, all because of Josh. This isn't the best thing to hear, but Josh and I, well, we were never actually engaged. Mom's frown deepened. What? We were faking it. It was part of his bid to win the Cedar Grove Hotel. But I've been secretly in love with him for a long time. Without even realizing it. And we started to fall for each other on this trip. And he came clean about the ruse, except now he wants to be with me, and it's just, she groaned. It's a big, stupid Christmas mess, and I need some time away from him so I can think. Her parents shared a look. Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. I'm sorry to hear all this, honey. We really liked him. Can we still like him or does that need to change? Her dad asked. Amelia laughed, surprised to find her throat tight with emotion. I still like him. So, you can too. They chatted a bit longer about Josh, how he'd still gotten the hotel despite starting the bid with a lie. By the time they'd been caught up on the turn of events, Amelia felt depleted and ready for a nap. After all, her vacation was officially starting. She'd just assumed she might be more ready to kick back and relax and leave work behind. But work was at the forefront more than ever. And she wouldn't be able to truly rest until she explored her options to the fullest extent. Which meant paying Colin Forrest a visit to find out if he truly was interested in hiring her or if it was nothing more than a power play like Josh had warned her. Chapter 19. Josh. While Josh counted the minutes of his agreement to give Amelia time away to think, his father decided to fly to Cedar Grove personally to celebrate Josh's victory. He arrived via private helicopter, his favorite mode of transportation, at a small, not often used helipad tucked away at the back of the Cedar Grove property. Plenty of people came out to witness the surprise arrival, including Stan himself. Josh stood back and watched as his father came out of the helicopter, waving at everyone like the damn president himself. Mitchell Denton Sr. was all smiles as he headed for Josh, his salt and pepper hair moving in the draft from the slowly chopping blades. "Son. Merry Christmas." Mitchell barked, hugging him briefly. Josh led him toward the small group of people gathered. "Stan, please meet my father, Mitchell Denton." "What a pleasure." Stan shook his dad's hand vigorously, looking at him as if he were meeting a celebrity. "I've long been an admirer of your chain of hotels. This is an honor. We're happy to have your stunning property on board." The three of them began a brisk walk back to the hotel. The path was powdered with snow that had fallen while they'd been waiting for the helicopter. "I'm sure Josh has told you what a special place Cedar Grove holds in our hearts." "Absolutely," Stan said, and the two of them fell into a conversation about winter memories. Josh followed them on the path, thinking instead about Amelia. She'd been at her parents' house for 24 hours, and it felt more like an entire week. This wasn't a good sign. Inside the hotel, after sending Stan off with a handshake, Josh led his father to the restaurant, where they'd planned to celebrate. "Boy, I'm so proud of you. You really pulled it off." His father adjusted his glasses, taking them off to inspect the lenses. "Let's get one of everything to celebrate. And a shot of everything behind the bar." Josh laughed, unfolding his napkin over his lap. That was always the way his father proposed celebrations, with excess. If his arrival in a private helicopter wasn't a good indication of his father's tastes, then nothing was. "I'll definitely take one of every dessert," Josh cracked, looking over the menu. The murmur of the conversations around him drew his attention, and he let his gaze drift around the restaurant. All he could think of was Amelia. And in so little time, even this place, where they'd dined a handful of times, had become linked with her. The entire property now had her memory associated with it. Just like his mother. It seemed like a sign that Amelia might really be the one. "Josh?" His father looked at him with an arched brow. He came to attention, realizing he'd missed what his father was saying. "What's that?" "You drifted off." His father cleared his throat, lowering his own menu. "I said Mitch won't be joining us this year." "Why not?" This didn't surprise him though. His older brother was as much of a workaholic as the rest of them. "He's spending Christmas elsewhere." He didn't exactly explain. "When will you be coming back to the city?" They had plans to celebrate Christmas together, but driving away from Cedar Grove during this tenuous time with Amelia seemed unwise. He didn't want to leave, because if he did, he feared he might never see her again. "In a few days, unless something comes up," he said cryptically, sipping his water. His dad searched out his son's gaze. "Boy, what's going on here? We're supposed to be celebrating, but instead you're sulking like you didn't pull off the greatest acquisition of the year." His father's words warmed him some, but they couldn't get past the deep freeze of Amelia wanting to leave. "I'm happy. I am. Just having some interpersonal problems, let's say." His dad grunted. "Lady problems?" Josh deflated slightly. "Yeah. You could say that." But he didn't want to get into it, not now. Not when he was supposed to be happy. Because if he got into it again, he'd travel that same dark road that he'd been traveling the last 24 hours, toward the suspicion that Amelia was using the time away to figure out how to tell him, sorry, but no. He and his father had a decent dinner, and by the time Mitchell was ready to fly back to the city, he'd managed to weasel a few more details out of Josh. "Listen," his dad said as he shrugged on his long, wool coat in the lobby. "If you miss her so much, make sure she knows it. She said she needs some time apart." "Yeah, and maybe she does. But that doesn't mean you can't reach out. Remind her why she fell for you in the first place. You know, one time in the beginning with your mom, I did something to piss her off real bad. I mean, she got hot. So what did I do? I didn't bring her flowers. Hell, no. Instead, I went to her daddy's house and told her parents how I'd messed up. Told them that I loved her. And asked for her hand in marriage on the spot. Josh laughed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Dad, I don't think that's gonna work this time. Well, it's an idea. He pulled Josh into a gruff hug before slapping his back. I know I'm not good at showing it, but I'm proud of you, son. Both you and your brother. And I can't stand seeing you mope like some lovesick teenager. So do something about it. Josh waved his dad off before wandering back to his suite, his morose gaze falling over everything with a sense of something lacking. This hotel, the suite, hell, even his future, all of it looked better with Amelia in the picture. Maybe his dad wasn't entirely off base with that story about his mom. He might not ask for Amelia's hand in marriage, but he might do well to show up at her parents' house and offer up even more of himself and his pride. Because one thing was for certain. He wanted Amelia. Nobody else came close to making him feel this way. Never before and probably never again. He'd give her one more day. And then, if by Christmas Eve, he hadn't heard from her, he'd be paying her parents a visit. Chapter 20. Amelia. Amelia darted down Main Street at noon the day before Christmas Eve, feeling a lot like a thief on the run. She didn't want to be seen. Not by anyone. Because every inch of her crawled at the thought of what she was on her way to do. But she needed to know the truth. Did Colin Forrest want to hire her for her skills or because he wanted to pull her away from Josh in some frustrating corporate power move that was never about her? She'd taken a position at Denton Hotels right out of college and she'd been content to grow within the company, but after Colin had pressed his business card into her hand, she'd been plagued with what-ifs. What if there was a better opportunity out there? One where she could be on an even playing field with Josh career-wise? Obviously it wouldn't happen right away, but if Forrest Hotels was expanding into new markets, it would be a great stepping stone for her. Assuming it wasn't all BS. She needed to know. Amelia walked into the downtown diner. The scent of burgers and coffee filled the air, and she immediately spotted Colin tucked into a booth in the far corner, his nose in his phone. He looked up as she approached and set his phone down on the table as she slid into the red high-backed booth, breathing heavily. Hi there. She tucked some hair behind her ears, drawing a deep breath. Wow. I feel like I ran a mile or am betraying the person I'm closest to in the entire world. Maybe it's both. Colin's cool smile didn't waver. Betrayal is a strong word. Josh would understand if you took a competitor's offer based on sheer practicality. We pay more and offer better benefits, because we're a company that still values morality over corporate-level profits. Amelia smiled up at a waitress who stopped by to offer a menu and a glass of water. Just coffee, please. She handed the menu back. And furthermore, we don't ask our employees to lie. For any reason. Colin offered a small smile. I heard about what happened with the Cedar Grove deal. I'm shocked Stan Lewis chose to reward that style of business negotiation, but I'm sure there was some sort of kickback engineered that I'm unaware of. Amelia frowned. There had been no kickback. And Colin clearly missed the memo about Josh coming forward to admit his deception. But defending him right now was beside the point. She was here for the potential job. I can't imagine what would compel a man to lie like that to begin with, Colin went on, sounding more and more self-righteous. He sniffed, sipping his coffee. You can rest assured that our deals are never underhanded. His mother, she blurted and then realized she'd spoken without meaning to. She cleared her throat, heat creeping up her neck. He has an attachment to the hotel because of his mother. She wouldn't say more, so she just offered a wan smile. Assuming that's the truth. Self-righteousness was slowly building inside her as he dismissed her comment. How are your wife and kids? She asked him as she took a sip of too hot coffee. Pardon? When we had brunch the other morning, you'd mentioned that your youngest wasn't feeling well. But then we never saw any of them again. Are they okay? Anger flashed across his face before he masked it. Sophie thought it would be a good idea to take the kids to Hawaii for the holidays. My oldest wants to learn to surf. His knuckles turned white where he was squeezing his coffee mug. Amelia felt guilty for poking at him because clearly there were problems that he was trying to hide. Before she could apologize, he launched into a rundown of the position he was offering, junior-level location scout for the newest New England division. She would remain based in NYC, working from home most of the time, with only occasional trips to Chicago required. The bulk of her work would be scouting new property listings online and assessing them for feasibility in long, complicated reports. The more Colin explained the job, the more she realized it sounded similar to what she was doing already. Just a better pay level, with a more impressive title, and the only travel she would be doing was limited to the area, returning home at night. After Colin had gone through all the major selling points of the offer, he waggled his eyebrows at her over his mug. So, what do you think? We can verbally commit here and now with a contract to follow. I don't even care that tomorrow is Christmas Eve, I can have it in your inbox by tomorrow morning. The man seemed almost too eager to hire her, and Josh's words came back to her. Power play. At first she'd thought that Josh wanting to keep her on had been all about him not wanting to lose to Colin. But now? She sensed the same coming from Colin. That poaching her from Denton hotels was an ego play. Besides, Colin's attitude about what Josh had done was way too much like the pot calling the kettle black, given that his wife and kids were off to Hawaii the moment Colin found out the Lewises went with Denton hotels. I appreciate you meeting with me, she said, sipping her coffee. She hadn't wanted to trap herself here for an entire meal, especially if things went south. And now, she was grateful. Because she wanted to get away from Colin. Do you have any questions? No, I think I've heard everything that I need to hear. If you'll excuse me. She offered a smile as she scooted out of the booth. Colin froze, staring at her. So do we have a deal? We have a lot of fun at Forest Family Hotels. You won't regret coming to join us. Amelia had a sinking suspicion that she would. Shouldering her purse, she squeezed the strap. Here's the thing, Mr. Forrest. Other than the bump in pay, you're not offering me anything I don't already do now. Except I do it at a company I love working for. And while Josh might not have been truthful with the Lewises initially, you haven't been either. She started to walk away but then stopped and turned back around. You know, if you truly are a family company, maybe instead of sitting in this diner trying to get one over on Josh, you should be on a flight to Hawaii to spend Christmas with your actual family. She hurried out of the diner, gulping down the fresh air once she hit the cold day outside. As she walked down the sidewalk, hands jammed into her pockets, she added a bounce to her step. She hadn't intended to tell Colin Forrest off, but his high and mighty response to her and Josh pretending to be engaged had pushed her too far. Yes, they were wrong to do it, but Josh had come clean and still got the deal. That said something for the caliber of man Josh was in Denton Hotel's integrity as a company. By the time she'd made it back to her parents' house, her earlier elation had worn off and her heart felt heavy. Nothing felt right. And the more time dragged on, the more she wanted Josh. There weren't many days left until everything changed. She knew Josh would make good on his promise of a promotion. And yes, she was excited for that. But she didn't want to go back to Denton Hotels without knowing that she and Josh still had a chance. He wanted to try something with her. His words at the bar haunted her, were often the first thing she thought of when she woke up. Josh was right, their chemistry was real, and it was intense. She'd be making a huge mistake not to act on it. When her mom came into the front hall to greet her, the sight of her made emotion well. Fighting tears, Amelia said, I think I made a mistake. What is it, honey? Josh. I told him we should spend some time apart, but now I realize I was wrong, and he's back in New York, and I want him here. She stomped her foot, feeling every bit like a whiny little girl. Oh, honey. Her mom swept forward and wrapped her in a hug. You did the right thing by asking for your space. And it's okay if you don't want it anymore. Maybe I can drive. Her mom held up a finger in a sharp but silent rebuke. None of that talk. There's a snowstorm on the way, and you are not missing Christmas with the family. We don't get enough of you as it is. If you go back to the city today, we won't see you until the 4th of July. Amelia sighed, knowing her mother was completely right. Fine. I'll stay. But I'm going to act like a heartsick little girl until I figure out what I want to say to him. That's fine, her mother said, squeezing the sides of her arms. Now let's go have some potato salad. Chapter 21. Amelia. On Christmas Eve morning, Amelia awoke with a start in her childhood bedroom. Gray light filtered past the white curtains, and she looked around for a few moments, trying to get her bearings. She'd been dreaming. That much was sure. But something else had stirred her to consciousness. She yawned, stretching. The clock on the nightstand read 8:15. This was the definition of sleeping in. As she turned over, enjoying more of the warmth of her bed, she picked up a bass undertone from a conversation downstairs. Her eyes shot open, and she lifted her head a little, listening as hard as she could. Her mother laughed. More bass. Parts of her dream came back to her. Josh had been there, speaking to her. She couldn't hear him in her dream though. It was like he was too far away or mumbling or something. She pushed up onto a hand as the voice continued, and then she could hear the tones of her father's voice. Someone was here, that much was certain. But who? It's probably just a neighbor or Rob. She rolled out of bed, tugging on clothes as she did. It was ridiculous to hope that it was Josh, and even stupider to think that her dream had somehow been right. She continued listening as she headed toward the bathroom, searching out sounds of a toddler shriek, which would signal Rob and Rebecca, or the notable guffaw of their elderly neighbor, Mr. Jones. None of that. In fact, now? Total silence. Still, Amelia hurried to wash her face and brush her teeth. When she headed downstairs, she noticed a foreign pair of shoes by the door. Black leather boots. And very expensive looking. She swallowed a knot in her throat as she walked down the hall. Nobody in the kitchen. As she rounded the corner into the living room, the sight thereabouts stopped her heart. Josh sat on a couch, facing both of her parents on the adjacent sofa. He had a grin a mile wide on his face, and when he spotted her his entire face lit up. The way her heart started racing told her everything she needed to know. Tears immediately came to her eyes, and she drifted into the living room, unable to speak. W.H. Oh, honey. Her mother twisted around to see her. Good morning. Your Christmas Eve surprise is here. Josh was off the couch a second later, making big, confident strides toward her. He was dressed in slacks and a button-down, his brown hair expertly styled and sexy. The second those icy blue eyes found hers, the strength in her legs disappeared. The intensity of his attention was enough to knock her over. Amelia, he breathed as he wrapped her in a hug. She clung to him, wonder and disbelief cycling through her. What are you doing here? She asked, pushing against his chest so she could look up at him. To make sure he was real. I thought you went home. He shook his head, running his fingers along the shell of her ear. I was going to, but I didn't want to leave you. Even though you wanted some time. I hope a few days was enough because that's all I could manage. Ah, her mom cooed from the couch. Why didn't either of you come to wake me up? She demanded, peering around the gorgeous wall of man in front of her. We were talking, her mom insisted. Your boyfriend here wanted to make sure we were all clear about what happened at the hotel, her dad added. Amelia couldn't fight the smile. She narrowed her eyes at Josh. My boyfriend, huh? Their words, not mine. He slid a hand along the slope of her waist, down over the small of her back, cinching her closer. But I'm not opposed to the title. I might have told him about our conversation last night, her mother quipped. Amelia dissolved into laughter, burying her face in his chest. She wrapped her arms around his waist and squeezed as tightly as she could. Oh geez, Mom. Don't worry. She only spilled most of your secrets, Josh said, his breath hot at her ear. Can we get out of here? I need to take you somewhere. She nodded, propping her chin against his chest. Where? His sweet smile only grew bigger, white teeth against those lips that she wanted to feel against her own for the rest of time. Go get changed and you'll find out. Amelia raced upstairs faster than a kid toward Christmas Day presents, and nearly toppled 3 times in her rush to put real clothes on. She'd managed to pull on a black sweater with skinny jeans, and in the bathroom she brushed on only minimal foundation and mascara. Downstairs, she was tugging on her black snow boots when Josh strolled out into the hallway. I'm almost ready, she said, hopping on one foot as she struggled to pull on the left boot. He smirked, slipping his boots on, and lifted his jacket off the hook by the door. Once her boots were on, he opened the front door. You got a rental, she said, sliding into the front seat. She stroked the armrest as if it were the most unique and beautiful thing in the world. He could have brought a combine to pick her up in. She was just so damn happy to see him, to be near him. It was like a year had passed instead of 3 days. And she never wanted that much time to go by without seeing him again. Because even when they were strictly colleagues, she'd seen him 5, sometimes 6, days a week. They had a long history of seeing each other all the damn time. And now, she wanted to make sure they saw each other even more. Daily. Hourly. Waking up in the same bed. Going to sleep lost in each other's embrace. So where are we going? She laced her hand through his as he drove. He maintained that mysterious smirk and clucked his tongue. Can't say. Sorry. Are we going to the new owner's suite at the resort? She asked. No further information at this time, he said. Or maybe you're stealing me back to New York. His smile stretched wider. Keep trying. Oh. I know. We're heading back to Denton headquarters for one last run as boss and assistant. I missed you and I'm totally down for a little roleplay. A laugh erupted from him, his white teeth glinting in the early morning light. I like all these wrong answers. Keep going. You're taking me to a different hotel that we can rent by the hour just so we can take all these clothes off and celebrate Christmas Eve on our own? He squeezed her hand as he pulled onto Main Street. Now I like that idea. We might have a change of plans. Amelia looked around as he pulled into a parking spot downtown. Wreaths hung from every lamp post, and ornaments dotted the well-manicured bushes outside the coffee shop. Okay. I'll bite. Where are we going? Josh didn't say anything but instead offered his arm. She took it and walked alongside him, staring up at him in wonder. I'm still not certain this isn't a dream. If it was a dream, Josh said, looking down at her, would you be able to feel this? He dipped down and pressed his lips to hers, cupping her face between his hands. She pushed up onto her tiptoes, deepening the kiss, clutching at him as if he might disappear if she didn't hang on tight. When they broke for air, she felt like she could float into outer space. No more of that here, Josh said, leading her farther down the sidewalk. Not until we reach our destination. She giggled. Which only proved this man was for her. She was back to giggling. Our destination. How mysterious. He rounded the corner onto Jackson Street, and that's when the horse-drawn carriage came into view. She sucked in a breath, and the way his smile gleamed only proved that the carriage was their destination. Shut up, she said, though he had said nothing. Come on. He tightened his arm around her. We have a very important date with this horse. A Christmas Eve horse-drawn carriage ride. She laughed into her palm as they approached the driver, who talked to Josh like he'd been expecting them. Josh helped her inside first and then followed. They settled back into the ultra-comfy leather seat tucked into the gilded red and silver wooden carriage. Josh pulled a heavy wool blanket over their laps. Once they lurched forward, one majestic chestnut horse pulling them, Amelia turned to him. Now that we've reached our destination, can we make out like teenagers? In lieu of a response, Josh surged forward, his warm lips claiming hers. They kissed as the horse clip-clopped down the street, then turned down a pine-lined avenue leading out of town. I haven't even had a chance to explain anything, Josh said, running his thumb over her temple once they'd broken for air. Oh. Sorry. She brushed her nose against his. Go ahead. He wet his bottom lip, eyeing her hungrily. Maybe I don't want to now. He dove in for more kisses, which she accepted eagerly. The feel of his lips against hers satisfied something she couldn't define, much less understand. Like no matter where life might take them, Josh would always be the one for her. The carriage took a turn up a gentle incline. The downtown scene slowly transformed into trees and untouched woods. He kept his arm tight around her. This is so beautiful, she whispered to him. I've never done this before, even though the carriage is always here during the holidays. So you don't even know that this isn't the normal route? She laughed, shaking her head. Nope. Had no idea. I paid off the driver. He's taking us someplace off the beaten path. Amelia nestled into his side, and the two of them enjoyed the scenery as they wound deeper into the woods. After about a half-mile, the driver hung a right onto a heavily wooded property. A single lane wound through the trees. Tiny snowflakes started falling as soon as they crested the new path. As if God himself knew that they were entering the romantic phase of the trip. Do you know where we are right now? He asked, once they'd gotten a little lost in the woods around them. Definitely not. We're on the Cedar Grove Hotel property. Her eyes widened. Seriously? I like that I'm showing you new things in your own hometown. He pressed a kiss to her temple. My mom would love it too. Amelia buried her face in his chest. That's why we're coming to this spot specifically. Because it was my mom's favorite spot on the entire property. The end of the path was in sight, and the driver slowed the horse as they came upon an outlook. Sprawling in front of them, for miles and miles, was pure, untouched nature. Bare trees stretched as far as the eye could see, a small river cutting through the expanse. Josh sighed softly as he looked at it. She always liked coming here in winter, he said slowly, because she said you could see the earth's secrets that way. Amelia blinked, emotion tightening her throat. Whenever he talked about his mom, this happened. My mom grew up in a small town, and she always wanted her sons to appreciate the joys of nature, even though we lived in the city. She never wanted us to lack that heart that comes from having a tight-knit community. He paused, turning to look at her. And that's what I love about you. You have a big city spirit, but you're from here. And it shows. You have a small-town heart and you somehow managed to stay grounded. And you helped me stay grounded. Tears were welling in her eyes now, and her voice had totally disappeared. You're amazing, Amelia, he whispered, brushing his nose against hers. I'm sorry I tried to hold you back. I was being selfish. From the beginning, I wanted you for myself, but I didn't realize it at the time. But I don't want to promote you anymore. She blinked, confusion breaking through the overwhelming emotion. What? You can still have it if you want, Josh started, that mysterious smile returning to his face. But I want more for you. I called a friend who works in the urban planning department at Grayson International Development, the sustainable development policy think tank, and told him all about you. Your skills, your smarts. I told him how perfect you'd be for the position of manager of global research and strategic planning that just opened up. You have an interview in January if you want it. Amelia's mouth hung open, and she could only stare at him. The job would involve a lot of travel around the world, Josh went on, his grin turning mischievous. Like he knew just how perfect this opportunity was for her. Making recommendations based on your research and findings. I don't know. Sound like something you might be interested in? Amelia started laughing then. Deep, belly laughing. This was almost too good to be true. But it wasn't. It was her reality. Her new reality, with Josh at her side. I love you, she murmured, melting into him, her lips landing on his. You beat me to the punch, Josh said through their kiss. That was going to be my next point. He grinned once he broke the kiss, holding her chin between thumb and forefinger. Amelia, I love you. And please say you'll be mine. I have been, she murmured, resting her head on his chest. "Since I started working for you." Except neither of us knew it. Josh pressed a kiss to the top of her head, and they watched as the snow fell over the bare trees in the valley. This was the best Christmas of her entire life. Epilogue. 5 months later. Amelia. "Over there." Josh barked out the command, pointing to an unfinished mound of landscaping near the hotel. "This one needs to happen first. Then we can start the last cul-de-sac." Amelia laughed to herself, trying to keep her heels from clicking too loudly on the brick path. She'd flown in that morning from France, where she'd been working for the past week. Her new job was the dream she knew it would be, and the past few months had flown by in a challenging but amazing haze. She'd been worried when she first started traveling. Worried about the strain it would put on their relationship given how new it was. Worried that Josh would grow frustrated with so much time apart, but he'd been nothing but supportive. She loved her new job at Grayson, and her director had told her that once things settled down, her travel schedule would become easier, with more time spent in the home office or working remotely, if she preferred, since most of her meetings were held via Zoom anyway. Josh had taken to working remotely, often flying out to meet her, no matter where she was in the world, so they could spend time together. And now she had flown to Cedar Grove to surprise him. Once she was within arm's reach, she hurried forward, throwing her arm around him. Josh stiffened, but gasped once he realized she was there. Laughter hooped out of him as he pulled her into his arms, as if they hadn't just seen each other 5 days ago in Paris. Milai. He still used that nickname sometimes, but it didn't bother her as much. "What are you doing here?" "Wanted to drop in on my favorite head gardener." She grinned up at him, propping her chin against the plain gray t-shirt he wore. It was only mid-May, but it felt like summer already. She knew Josh had been working hard to get things renovated and ready for the upcoming busy holiday season. He'd adopted the Cedar Grove property as his pet project, even though he could have outsourced it to one of about a dozen employees. "Ah, babe," he murmured, lifting his sunglasses. She melted against him once she could look into his baby blues. She might never tire of looking at this man. Of getting lost in his gaze. "You smell like the fresh outdoors and manly sweat," she said, squeezing her arms tighter around his waist. "You got a room we could use real quick?" He laughed, looking around. "I've got about 30 or so at our disposal. Which is perfect, because I wanted you to see the newest renovations." They walked hand in hand toward the hotel, Josh gazing down at her. "God damn, I missed you," he murmured, bringing the back of her hand to his lips. "Me too." She rested her head against his shoulder as they walked inside the hotel. He led her past the ballroom, which had been renamed the Amelia Room in her honor. Then to the top floor, where all the suites were. He slid a keycard into room 515, which had been their suite the first time they'd stayed here together. "Whoa," Amelia breathed as she checked out the newest changes. He'd updated the carpet and removed the wood paneling. The bathrooms were being overhauled with raindrop shower heads and lots of stony-looking tiles. "Your brother has been a huge help," Josh said, leaning against the doorframe as she checked out the bedroom. "He's already been promoted once." Amelia beamed over at him, feeling the rush of love and passion fill her, as it often did when she looked at this man. "I'm so happy to hear that." "But there's one more big thing," Josh said, straightening suddenly. He led her over to the bay window overlooking the back of the property. Together they looked out the window, until Amelia noticed he'd started breathing faster. "Josh," she started, unsure if he was okay. He suddenly dropped to one knee, taking her hand in his. He pressed kisses to the back of her hand as Amelia stared in wonder. "Babe," he fished a tiny black box out of his pocket. "This is where it all began. Your hometown. This special property that means so much to the both of us. But it also began right here. Room 515. He grinned, then popped open the ring box. A gasp ripped out of her as she saw the enormous diamond waiting there. This was an engagement ring, no question. Tears immediately came to her eyes, and she clamped a hand over her mouth. "I'd been thinking about what ring I'd get you since Christmas, and when I saw this ring in the window of an amazing little jewelry store in Paris, I knew it was the one. I picked it up just this morning after having it sized locally. Originally, I'd planned to propose next Christmas, to make it sentimental and all, but damn it, I can't wait any longer. Amelia, my love. I want to travel the world with you, love you, and grow old with you until the day we die. Will you marry me? A laugh rocketed out of her, and she jumped up and down a couple of times, squealing. Yes. Of course. Yes. Josh surged to his feet, his lips against hers faster than the first tear could spill from her eyes. The tenderness of his proposal swept through her, the thoughtful touches making her even more emotional. The unplanned nature of it. The location. The fact that it was here, in the room where it had begun for them as a couple. This man was made for her. And she'd go anywhere, do anything, as long as she was by his side. The end. This was an audiobook created by Relay Publishing, who own exclusive copyright to the story in all territories and formats. For more information, please go to our website, www.relaypub.com. We hope you enjoyed.